use for the BCI technology. So, and I hope everyone will be seated down soon as well. I'll give you 30 seconds to do that. So there are many aspects of this industry to understand which may be impacted by some regulations. And these decisions based on facts must be carefully evaluated as they will have long-term effects on patients. Yesterday's presentations was an eye-opening on the promises of BCI. It is not the government's intention to hamper this promising industry. So the government can learn from industry and vice versa. Without further ado, we continue with the topics that are in the agenda today, and I'll let Karen take over. Take it away. He's here.
Okay, great. Okay, wonderful. So we had a really fruitful conversation yesterday where the intent was to really get an overview of the state of the art, and we also had the important framing of the applications through the lens of the patient population and lived experience advocate. And we started towards the end of the day, I think, needling towards some of these questions that we need to address to start to actually create operationalizable regulation or guidance, or even to decide if guidance is necessary. So today's conversation is really around talking about the essence of operationalizing ethical values. So law at its best represents the values of the citizenry. And when things are clearly black and white, you don't really need an ethicist, right? But we're on the horns of a dilemma here. So certainly we agree that putting patients first is critical and a laudable goal, but BIS also is trying to uphold the obligation of national security and other ways to keep Americans specifically not only healthy, but safe and economically thriving. And this is where we need multiple perspectives to help analyze the possibilities and consequences of taking certain actions. So as we're exploring topics today, please allow yourself room for this gray zone and these tension points, and consider that exploring ethical issues doesn't mean that regulation is necessary. And there is a world where ethics regulation and pro-BCI can work in additive ways and not in adversarial ways. So we'll discuss today those tensions and opportunities for advancing ethical neurotechnology for everyone, and a variety of strategies for proactively mitigating potential risks that may be associated with BCI, and even if those risks are ones that we should be considering in the near or far term. So today we'll get started with a little bit of background on export control. Then we're going to move into a discussion of the global landscape of neuroethics conversations. And we'll close with some discussions of risk mitigation strategies. And please think of it today as an opportunity to ask certain questions that you have in mind with a captive audience, and to think of co-creative solutions, not ones that are put upon you, but ones that you also put forward together. And so in that spirit, we're going to have an opening now with Matthew Borman. And please give Matthew Borman a welcome.
Thanks, Karen, and thanks, Betty, for putting this event on. Thanks all of you for coming. I thought I'd touch on a couple topics to, again, help frame the discussion for today. There's sort of a legal aspect to this, and there's a policy aspect. The legal aspect is black and white in one sense, Karen. In the Export Control Reform Act, which was passed in 2018, which is our current authorizing statute, there is a specific provision that requires us at Commerce to lead an interagency effort to identify and assess emerging and foundational technologies, and those that we conclude are essential to national security should be subject to some sort of export controls. And as you may know, but we'll hear about in more detail today, export controls means we control literally the export of items, which are commodities and the related software and technology, but we also control their re-export from a third country and their in-country transfer in a country. We also control the export of certain technologies when they're released to foreign nationals in the United States. So for example, foreign nationals here doing research or working at a company. So it's a fairly broad authority, we also have the authority to control the activities of U.S. persons, even if unrelated to the thing that's subject to our jurisdiction. So what we've been doing, and frankly, we've been doing this before that provision was passed, is we are always with our interagency partners, and that's primarily state, defense, and energy, assessing whether our technologies that are currently not subject to export controls that should be, because they have implications either for national security or foreign policy. Foreign policy is really protection of human rights. So that's sort of an overall landscape. Now, as a matter of policy, and also in the statute, whenever we're looking at imposing new controls, we certainly have to take into account the impact on domestic research and innovation, because we have to walk and chew gum sort of at the same time. We have to be able to precisely restrict what we need to restrict from countries and places that may misuse them, but do it in a way that doesn't undercut our own innovation and research and technology leadership. So to give you an example, a recent example of how we try to do that in the semiconductor space, last October we published a fairly extensive rule that had 3 parts. One part was to control the export of some advanced chips that are really useful for the most advanced artificial intelligence applications. And to give you an example, these are really GPUs. And until relatively recently, GPUs were not thought to be of national security concern because they're used in gaming systems, right? But over the last 5+ years, it's become quite apparent that they're also very useful in artificial intelligence. And while artificial intelligence has a plethora of legitimate civilian commercial uses, it also has a significant applications for various national security applications, whether it's weapons modeling, battlefield intelligence, all sorts of things, as well as on the human rights side, identifying dissidents, ethnic groups, and so on, as unfortunately we've seen happen in China in particular. So anyway, this rule, we targeted the most advanced, which is a small part of the commercial market, so it really shouldn't negatively impact the technology leadership of the companies, U.S. companies and other companies who produce these chips. We also extended that control to foreign production of the chips, because most of these chips are not manufactured in the United States. In fact, they're not. They're manufactured outside the United States. And we have the ability to extend our control over the manufacture of foreign items if they're based on U.S. software technology or with a U.S. tool. We also imposed additional controls on items going to supercomputer programs in China. Again, a small slice of the overall market, but important because supercomputers, exascale computers, have, again, very legitimate civilian commercial uses, but also have significant military applications. And then last, we targeted tools going to the most advanced semiconductor production in China, because frankly, we do not think it's in our national interest for China to be on par with the allied world, the Western world, in terms of its ability to produce the most advanced chips, because again, those have the most significant national security applications. So that's an example, a recent example of how we try to really target these new controls so that they're effective, they get at the problem set, but do it in a way that doesn't undercut U.S. leadership. And a significant part of that, of course, is working with allied governments, because in all these cases, and I'm sure in BCI, the U.S. is not the only country that has advanced BCI research and capability. So it's critical for us to get allied governments who have companies or research institutions with comparable capability to impose comparable controls. So that's what we're focused on. So in this particular case, of course, we are really interested and we need to get input from the research community, the commercial community, to understand where the technologies are, what the applications are, so that we can make a really informed decision. And as Karen mentioned, as we're looking at this sector, if you will, it's not, we don't have an idea yet whether it should be regulated for export purposes or not. That's the whole purpose of continuing to try to get as much input as we can. Generally speaking, if we decide that there is some slice of it that should be regulated for export purposes, we would typically go out through our technical advisory committees as well as through a public comment period. So proposed rule, public comment. That's our preferred approach. In some cases, we see an exigent circumstance that requires us to go, say, to an interim final rule. But as a general rule, especially in a new area that here currently has not been regulated or subject to export controls, we generally want to get as much feedback. The other thing I would say is the way we craft these controls, we try to be as technical as possible so that everybody in the affected community can have a clear understanding of what's covered and what is not. So, for example, I think it would be, we would never have a control that covers artificial intelligence. Like, that would be completely ineffective and unworkable and frankly counterproductive. But what you may have seen, we do have one artificial intelligence related control that we published several years ago that is very specific to, I would say, geospatial imagery. Long predated the balloon scenario, but what happened was actually in the government, one of the processes we have is that a company or a research institution can go to the Department of State and seek an official ruling as to whether their item, whether it's a commodity, software, technology, is on the U.S. munitions list, which is a State Department list that controls certain items for export purposes. In that process, which is a state defense commerce process, we determined that it was not on the U.S. munitions list, which is the most restrictive list, as you can imagine. But so it was subject to our jurisdiction, but at the least restrictive level. We call that EAR 99, Export Administration Regulations 99. It's a basket category. But significant capability of this particular geospatial imagery application. So we imposed a unilateral control on it because in that case, there was only one party in the United States that could make something at this capability. And then we've gone to the relevant multilateral export control regime to try to get multilateral agreement. So that's an example of how we do this. But again, if you look at it, it's very technical, has very technical parameters. So anybody in that space ideally can read it and know whether their product is covered by it or not. And then in our regulations, if it's covered, you usually can easily tell where do I need government approval to release it, either an actual export or release it to a foreign national in the United States. So that's how we're trying to get at this. So again, I really thank you all for participating. You know, we've got a lot of brain power, Betty and her colleagues here at Commerce. Well, in BIS, more brain power in other parts of Commerce like NIST, and a lot of brain power in other executive branch agencies. But generally speaking, we're not the ones doing the research. We're not the ones funding the research. So we really need to hear on an ongoing basis from all of you who are. So I was going to stop at this point and take a couple questions, but I see we already have one. So go ahead, start us off.
Heather Dean, FDA. So my question is there any other example of an export control on a device whose main purpose and currently only application is patient health and quality of life?
I'm not sure. Well, let me put it this way. In our system, basically everything that's in the U.S. is subject to export controls. Now, the vast majority of things like this podium can go most places in the world without a license. But for example, we would classify this podium as EAR 99. But if somebody wants to send this to Cuba or Syria or North Korea, they need a license. So Betty will probably better position to answer this than me. I'm not off the top of my head aware of a device that's, say, controlled multilaterally. But certainly we have biological agents, biological pathogens that are controlled. And then we have a graduated set of controls. So the most restrictive ones are those that are controlled by one of the four multilateral export control regimes. So there's one that deals with chemicals and biological agents and biological pathogens called the Australia Group. And that's designed to prevent the proliferation of items that could be used to produce chemical and biological weapons. There's another one that deals with missile technology, another one that deals with nuclear proliferation, and another one that deals with conventional arms. So those are all the most restrictive, generally requiring a license everywhere but to our allies. We have another strata of things we control at the anti-terrorism level, which generally can go places except to the state sponsors of terrorism, and then this third basket. So to more directly answer your question, I'm not sure, but Betty may have more detail on this. If there's any device in this category you've described that's subject to multilateral controls, but certainly the devices, even some of the devices you describe, may require a license to the most restricted destinations.
I'm going to help you moderate the Q&A, but
Yeah,
here's
go ahead.
Well, can you repeat the question again? Or?
Yeah, so the question was, is there any device that's solely for patient treatment that's regulated for export control purposes? And so my answer was, I'm not sure that there is any that's multilaterally controlled, but certainly there are some that are subject to our jurisdiction and may require a license, or we have a whole list of blacklisted, if you will, foreign parties. And typically everything subject to our jurisdiction needs a license. So if somebody wanted to send a patient care device to Huawei, for example, the Chinese telecom company, they'd have to come in and get a license for that.
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, yeah, so right now we do not have, excuse me, we don't have any controls for medical devices at all. It's considered, excuse me, EAR 99, excuse me, under our jurisdiction, but there is no restriction in the sense that medical devices do not require a license from commerce, but probably to most sanctioned countries.
Yeah, or
like
to
Iran,
sanctioned entities.
Iran and all this, in Russia probably right now.
Yeah.
Okay, another question.
I think I'm Lee Hochberg from VA, Mass General and Brown University. I think this is the exact same question. So thank you, Heather, for asking it the first time. But I guess this is a clarification. Do we know, are there any approved medical devices in the U.S. today that are subject to export controls beyond the request to send those devices to countries that have been specifically, to which everything permission needs to be requested?
Yeah, I don't know if there are. My sense is probably not, but that's not, when we put something on an export control list, we typically, I don't think, are looking at whether it's an FDA approved device, for example, if that's what the question is.
It is. So,
yeah.
So that's, at least for me, that's a helpful starting point.
Yeah.
We're all here talking about, of course, medical devices that may hopefully at some point be approved by FDA. So it's good to know that so far we think that number is 0.
Yeah. But again, that's a really interesting data point that if people in the course of looking at this topic identify some, that would be useful for us to know.
Anna Wexler, the University of Pennsylvania. So I think for something like geospatial imagery, I think the concern for national security, what the concern is pretty clear. I think the issue that at least we were dancing around yesterday and maybe we'll come to today is what is the issue of concern for BCI devices? So one, I'm wondering if this would be something helpful to focus on today. And then two, you mentioned that this could go to a public comment period. So when that does, let's just say it does go to a public comment period, will that concern, that national security concern, be specified in whatever goes out for public comment?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, if we decide that we've identified some slice of BCI, if you will, that potentially is essential to national security. And again, essential to national security is not, it's only used in national security applications because almost by definition, most of what we control is born commercial or born civilian, but also has some military application, whether it's conventional arms, WMD, or even abuse of human rights, which is more of a foreign policy issue. But yes, as much as we can, we would like to have that in the preamble so people can understand here's the concern that's giving rise to this proposed control text.
Mike Walmetz, Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory. I'm interested in the timeline for this. Let's take the example of of GPUs. And so, it became clear that GPUs were going to be useful at some point, let's say 5+ years ago, for training and deploying machine learning models. But let's say that you knew in advance that it is likely, let's say we knew a decade or 15 years ago, just like when these were first developed, that these would likely be useful when we had the data sets and when we had the models, that there was some reasonable probability that this would become a critical part of machine learning systems. Does that factor into the way that you assess export control for emerging technologies?
Yeah, thanks. It's a very good question. So 2 pieces. One is the ideal export control is one that's put into place as early as possible, because then you have less disruption of current activity and people can plan. But at some point, again, we want to make sure that we're not putting a control in place that then caps or inhibits or impairs the ongoing legitimate development of a technology. So to give you an example that we're currently looking very closely at, as you can imagine, is what to do in the quantum realm, right? So, semiconductors are everywhere. There's all sorts of infrastructure and ecosystems. Quantum, a lot of work being done there, but it's a much smaller slice compared, say, of the economy and technology development to semiconductors. So the earlier that we can identify something, the better, I think, from both the government's point of view, but also from the community's point of view.
Rob Franklin with BlackRock Neurotech. Could you guys talk a little bit more about how you deal with existing proliferation? If there's technologies that are already widely available outside the US, in maybe Europe or let's say China, then how does that come into your thinking, and how does that affect any future export controls you might put in place?
Yeah, that's a very important factor. So if it's available from allied countries, that suggests that we work with the allies either in one of these formal multilateral export control regimes that I mentioned, or even on a plurilateral basis to agree on what should be controlled and a licensing policy. But if it's available in what I would say are the potentially target countries, then that makes it that much different, because it's hard to see how a control on something that's already available in a target country would be effective. And the statute actually directs us to make that part of our analysis. So again, input from the research community is very helpful in that, because again, you all, I think, are much better positioned to tell us what, the state of development of some technology research is in China, for example.
Okay, I think this will need to be the last question. This will be the last one.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Nick Langholz from NIH. So a lot of our government funding programs, partially because of congressional mandate, are pushing towards, open access publications and data sharing, including a lot of our efforts within the BRAIN Initiative. So, data that's being collected in BCI space with the grant funding, the goal is to make that open. So how might hypothetically export controls be implemented from a data sharing and kind of open science, open source standpoint?
Yeah, thanks. Also, very good question. So in our system, generally speaking, if something is publicly available, it's just outside of the realm of export controls, for the obvious reason that you can't really control it. There are some exceptions to that. You may be aware that there are also some ideas floating around on controlling data as data. So in our world, data can be export controlled if it's technology, which for us means the information to develop or produce the controlled thing. So if it's truly data that's not for that purpose, then generally that's not, even by its own terms, that's not going to be subject to export control jurisdiction. And then beyond that, even if it's technology to develop a controlled thing, if it's publicly available, generally speaking, we don't control that. But I know that there are concerns. On the one hand, the importance of getting that out so many people can access it and make beneficial use of it. But there's also concerns about some security implications for that kind of data being publicly available.
Okay.
Good. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you for fielding
you
all those questions. And,
Yeah.
thanks for kicking us off. I think we're ready to address the hard questions today because we've spent a full day becoming friends yesterday. So,
All right,
you.
good. Thank you.
okay, Blair. We're going to have a conversation, a short talk from Blair Casey. Oh, there you are. Just to bridge the 2 days and the perspective of a lived experience advocate. Thank you, Blair.
Absolutely. Blair, you're a good friend, one of my best buddies here in New Orleans, and I hate to drop this bomb on you so suddenly. It's not said often enough in life. I love you. Yesterday, I met with one of the leading amyotrophic lateral sclerosis physicians in the world, and he diagnosed me with ALS. I intended to write some inspiring piece, one about being persistent and working through this, like the same determination that kept me in the NFL for 10 years. But I want to be honest with you. I am very scared and I'm very frustrated. My friend Steve Gleason was a badass athlete. You know, he was even a better academic. He played baseball and football. He actually was a better baseball player than football people, which people honestly don't know. He'll forever be known as one of the biggest sports plays in Saints history, in the NFL history, after Hurricane Katrina, the first game back in the Superdome. Steve married New Orleanian Michelle Varisco Gleason, and in typical Steve style, they went on a 6-month honeymoon. And I'm not talking about glamping. I mean a little van that they drove from country to country. I was there the day he got married. And I remember January 6th of 2011, the email he sent me about his diagnosis. As he was somebody I looked up to my whole life, it was up to me to figure out what I could do. So turns out Steve's wife, Michelle, babysat me when I was a kid. I had the opportunity to meet her, and I guess it was about 2008. She said, "Oh, hey, Blair, you remember I used to babysit you when you were 2?" And I'm like, absolutely not. I do not remember. We became quick friends. And over the years, it was really a blessing to me because I got to meet and get to know the person that I looked up to my whole life. And for those of you that have people that you look up to and admire, I don't know how often it comes when they actually turn out to be better than you could actually imagine they could be. So what is ALS? Obviously, everybody here by now knows what ALS is, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. What do we know about it? We know that every 90 minutes, someone's diagnosed. Every 90 minutes, somebody loses their battle to this disease. The average lifespan is 2 to 5 years, and living with ALS can cost over $200,000, and that's above and beyond what Medicare and insurance covers. Think about that, right? If you have ALS, you fast track yourself normally on a Social Security disability to get Medicare benefits. That really prohibits the cost of living, right, and the quality of life. How do we describe ALS? Well, Steve's wife, Michelle, probably sums it up best. I think you get the point. So because of Steve's progression, he was looking into what else existed. And there's a lot of nonprofits and ALS organizations that were doing fantastic things, but nobody was focusing on the now needs. Now needs are the ones that are going to keep people independent, keep people trying to find purpose in life. That's what we're all here for. We need the tools to figure out what we're trying to accomplish. That's when Steve deemed his motto, until there's a cure for ALS, technology can be that cure. His motto, his slogan, "No white flags," is one that embodies who we are. And I heard it yesterday from some of my fellow advocates, Joey. It's true. I mean, this is a community that knows the benefit of these solutions. We work together. There needs to be more people involved with this, because if there's not, I was saying it earlier, engineers tend to over-engineer problems that don't exist. So let's talk about Team Gleason's mission. We improve the life of people living with ALS by providing innovative technology and equipment, ultimately enhance quality of life. And how do we figure out how to do this? We started diving into industry. What do I mean by that? I mean, when Steve was diagnosed in 2011, we had every eye gaze manufacturer come with us, come meet with us because they went on vacation, because they were those crazy people that like to drive across the country. But we quickly realized what was working well and what was not. And it was up to us to inform these companies how they needed to improve upon their user interface, how they needed to take the feedback from the community and implement it into their solution, because ultimately, that's why they have this solution. But as we looked at what we were doing, we also recognized that it wasn't enough, right? We had to continue to advance the technology, and if we didn't, we weren't going to have enough solutions. And it's known, advancements, right, in technology and innovation, they improve quality of life. Watching Steve progress, watching him struggle to walk, watching him thinking if he yelled loud enough, he could walk again, it'll break you. And it'll break you in a way that's needed to make the change that this community and other communities need. So how do we go about doing this? Because, as I mentioned, improving quality of life through innovation and partnerships is necessary. This is what we do, right? We do this because we have an intimate knowledge of the clinical approach. We have specialists. We have two amazing specialists, and Daniel Vance and Emily Corman, that specialize in SLP with a focus on augmentative communication, and an OT that did all of his graduate work on seating and positioning for people with ALS, right? This is our skill set. We're patient driven. We work hand in hand with the community. They are the driving force behind what we do. We don't make things up because we think it's a good idea. We know it's a good idea. And we've now integrated this concept with our specialists in the community, and we started being the ultimate collaborators and conveners, bringing industry together to advance. 2014 Microsoft Hackathon, the result of it, the ability to drive your wheelchair with your eyes. That same 2014 Hackathon was the beginning of the integration of Windows, eye gaze, dwell, window control, so basically your cursor control, into Windows. We did that, how? Well, we did it with our specialists, the community, and leaders in the technology industry. Comcast, eye gaze enable remote. We require a user researcher, our specialists, the community. We document this process. Go to webremote.com, check it out. It's pretty cool, right? And this works very well. It's flawless, it's seamless, and it's a tool that the community needed, and we executed. Non-standard speech recognition. If you look at the big news that came out between Google, Microsoft, Apple, Amazon, Meta, they're all working together. Why? To collect one data set that will be used to help every company. And we are involved with that project, but I'm not going to go too much into detail because I don't want to get in trouble. These are examples, and there's many more, of working with companies like a Google, right? Collecting more non-standard speech, data the first time we did it for their models. And we're the reason working with them that they knew they needed to do something different, and they knew how to do it different, and now that is a new methodology. So how do we know how to do this really well? How do we do it? This is our focus: mobility, communication, home automation, innovation, adventures. Mobility, alternative drive controls, communication, alternative inputs, augmentative communication, eye gaze, synthetic voices. This is our focus. This is what the community needs, and we're doing a lot of it, and we're doing it really well. Adventures, people are like, oh, why do you do adventures? Well, we want to tell the human story. We want to show how people use these technologies. We want to make it loud, and we want it to be able to be relatable. Thank you. So let's talk about some of our milestones. We opened up the first assistive technology lab in New Orleans, right? First of its kind. What do? We brought together leaders in the technology industry. We have every consumer-based product. We have every AAC device, every alternative input, every wheelchair. Why? How does this all work, right? How does it work together? How does it not work together? We quickly realized where gaps were, right? Gaps we identified, for example, within Amazon, right? How does their user interface for Alexa compare from OS to Windows? Well, we found glaring differences, right? And what do? Identify them. We're here to take this information, with the community and with our specialists and make the change. We held an innovation roundtable where we brought Google, Comcast, Microsoft, Amazon together. Why? To collaborate for the community. We created our own home automation program. We had to find a way that would allow people to use every input method, voice, hands, eyes. And how do we get this done? We do it with our team. You know, we're caretakers, we're PTs, SLPs, OTs, you know, we're fathers, mothers, we're family. Why? And how do we know as much as we do? You can see what our requests are over the past few years. Last year was nearly 6,000 program service requests. What's coming? Well, we want to get to 70 to 90% of the ALS population by 2027 with our programs. This seems to be a little bit crazy, but we have a proven track record of trust, right? Trust that starts with the community, but simultaneously, it allows us to bring that into the design environment, right? Our first time working with Google, what did we do? We brought them into the person's house with ALS. They needed to see the environment, understand the environment. It was enlightening to see what they did not think about. They use that methodology now every time they're working on accessible design. And we have amazing committees that have actually helped us get to this point. With patients, leaders in the technology industry. You can see some of the leaders that we work with on a regular basis. Also, everything that we learn, although we're only in the US, I'm also the chair of the International ALS MD Alliance. And this team is one that we work with the things that we learn together everywhere. And we want to try to make it available everywhere. What's our focus? Who's our focus? This is the A team. I don't know a better way to put it. They're a group of badass high-end users. They all have ALS. Led by Tim Gleason's very own Daniel Vance. This team can literally, it's former State Department, right? You name it, engineer. All these teams that we have, we work together. Steve's journey is one that, you know, everybody probably already knows, but, you know, I remember him saying, I'm not going to fade away and die quietly. I'm going to find the solutions. I'm going to advance the solutions, and our team is going to work with these companies to ensure it's done properly. How am I looking on time? She's being nice to me. Well, this is a video about access in our assistive technology lab, and I'm happy to share with anybody after. I haven't been diagnosed. But without innovative solutions, you know, that Team Gleason understands and is brought to market, things like the ability to drive your wheelchair with your eyes, things like the integration of non-standard speech into your consumer-based products, things like accessible environmental controls, you know, they wouldn't be available. And the quality of life, people living with ALS wouldn't change. BCI is on that list. Team Gleason gets the why. We've proven why and how. And the why is here, the how you get it done, we've accomplished. So we do this through current and future partnerships. I heard about, you know, public and private. There's a big gap here that I continue to hear, and I was trying to figure out how to put it in a delicate way. There's things that we've identified, like the non-invasive BCI, just to point it out, if it sits on your head and you have a headrest, you know, what is that going to do for a person living with the disease, right? What's it going to do for a caretaker and quality of life? I hope that these things have been taken into consideration, but I can tell you from our team's perspective, we haven't seen that yet. You know, we're unique. We have the trust. We have the relationships. We have the proven track record for success. You know, we want to see things change. We need a commitment for the community, for regulation, for access, led by the patient, for the patient, with the right guidance. If we're looking for outcome measures, you know, feasibility measurement assessments, right, how we evaluate these technologies, we've done that. So lean on the organizations that are patient-focused, because you're going to get what you need, or you could pay a lot of engineers, and let me know how that works out. I'd love to hear from you.
Thank you so much. Wonderful. Okay, so that was a powerful transition for us. Blair, thank you, and we'll transition from there into the next session.
Was it too powerful?
Just powerful enough. So, Tongili, could you also please come up here? Are you here? Saw you a minute ago. There you are. Okay, so we're next. So we're trying to bridge this community and those needs with a lot of this nuts and bolts of export control, and they're trying to, please, explore how to innovate without shutting doors for teams like these and the powerful collaborations that you have. And so he will speak for 15 minutes now, okay. And there will be opportunity. And then Betty will speak, and then we'll have some opportunity for discussion. Thank you.
Oh, I need this. So hi everyone. I'm going to drive you very fast through the basics of export control, but related to emerging and foundational technology controls. So you already know, as I said yesterday, in 2018. Let me see. Sometimes I try to use my pointer, but it may not work today. So we have this everywhere. That's good. In 2018, Congress enacted the Export Control Reform Act, right? So Section 1758 authorized Commerce to establish appropriate control on the export, re-export, and the in-country transfer of technologies that are emerging or foundational, but they must be essential to the national security of the United States. That's the key, essential to the national security of the United States. So, and this is something you have to remember, advance notice of proposed rulemaking. I think Deputy Assistant Secretary mentioned that when a rule is considered for making, we publish it to the public. Say, hey, we need your feedback. And it is called advance notice of proposed rulemaking. So in 2018, without any further ado, Commerce published advance notice of proposed rulemaking seeking comment from you guys, technology developers and the general public on how to go about controlling emerging and foundational technology. And we received some feedback. So what is important is that in that advanced notice of proposed rulemaking, Commerce say, what should we do? Okay, let's list 14 categories of technologies, group them there just to guide. This is not exhaustive. It doesn't mean it's everything. There are other categories out there, but at least as the beginning, something to guide. So you can see that in that list, brain-computer interfaces was also listed there. So that's why we are here. So these are categories, very, very important. Why? Because you can see that these categories have subfields and subsets, and even this listing is not exhaustive. And you will see another category like the artificial intelligence. Look at that. Almost 11 subsets right there. So why am I putting this slide here? Because there's a point that we are trying to make. What is it that need to be controlled under Section 1758 of the Export Control Reform Act? Are we controlling these categories? Are we controlling the subsets of these categories? Not at all. So what is it that we want to control? And this is very important. This point here is, there are people who say, you know what? The national security is so important. Let's just go ahead and control everything and very fast and quickly to make sure that China doesn't get anything. And other people say, be careful because if you do that, you are just going to kill everything. But BIS has its own approach, and it's based on national security. So there got to be a rigorous identification of what is it that is a national security that is implicated in this technology that we want to control. What is it? It has to be identified. If not, we don't. Number two, we have to learn, we at Commerce, methodically learn about the development stages of technology. It starts in lab, and then we don't control something that is not commercializable. Actually, control is not the appropriate word. What we do is we facilitate export through license. That's what is it? Control. Mean that you want to export something, there's a license, you require a license for that. This one, like the Deputy Assistant Secretary was saying, you can export this one everywhere. But if you need to export this to Cuba, maybe you need a license for that. So license, we don't control really, but we we give you license to export. So the last section is very important. Section 1758 control must be a specific item, must be something specific. Is it hardware, specific hardware that is so important for national security that need to be controlled? Is it software? Is it technical information? So this is crucial. You are here for brain-computer interfaces. Is there anything somewhere useful for brain-computer interfaces, be it a hardware that can become essential to the national security of the United States? If that question is yes, then we will write advance notice of proposed rulemaking on that and publish it for you to comment on that. So I wanted to explain something. Emerging foundational technology, Commerce has changed it. Now we say Section 1758 technologies or Section 1758 control. It's because there have been a lot of discussion about emerging foundational technology. I'm not going to go through all these things, but this slide will be available for you guys to go over. But I wanted to tell you that there has been a change. So multiple reasons for that, and I'm just going to go over this one, that a proposed rule on controls on certain marine taxons. Maybe you had read about it. So these marine taxons are natural, they are in nature. These are natural things. So if we want to control them under Section 1758, is that emerging technology or foundational? So normally it should be foundational because it's naturally occurring. But then the same marine taxon, when novel technology and methods are used to isolate and purify, this same taxon become usable for chemical biological weapons. So this same taxons now purify. Is it emerging technology? Is it emerging? But it's the same thing that is naturally occurring. So you can see that it can be very complicated. So Commerce said, you know what? If it is essential to the national security of the United States, let's not waste time about emerging foundational. We control it. You need a license to export it because of the requirement of Section 1758 of the Export Control Reform Act. So that's the conclusion that Commerce got to and say, okay, we are just going to say Section 1758 technologies or Section 1758 controls. So I wanted to, just go over it and explain a little bit about that. But this is a very important slide. What is it? What is the process really? What's the process? Number one, we need to identify and assess an item. An item here means a specific item in technology. So once we identify it, we need to discuss it with you, the technology developers, and our technical advisory committees. That's the first step. Identify what is essential to the national security of the United States, and then discuss it with those who are developing it, and then determine whether this item really qualifies to be controlled under Section 1758 of the Export Control Reform Act. If yes, then we can draft a proposal, proposed rule, and we will publish it. Sometimes it is called notice of inquiry, sometimes it is called advance notice of proposed rulemaking, and both are published for feedback. And then when the feedback are received, then the proposed rule will be refined in the light of these feedbacks. And then not only that, we take it to the like-minded partners in multilateral export control regimes for further discussion. And when it is adopted there, we know that since many countries have adopted it, that will be a good rule, and we can publish it and integrate it into our own export administration regulations. That's how we call our book of rules, Export Administration Regulation, EAR. So this is a very good slide. But other slides are good too. So This is an interaction, it's kind of visual way of saying that we don't produce, in this room here, we don't produce technology. You do. So we are in the middle, and we are mandated to control the technology. We don't know where they are. So we have to come to you, the industry. We have to go to academia. We have to go to private research organizations, associations that are related to technology, as stakeholders in technology development. We have to go to government laboratories, agencies that, they too produce technology. But we at Commerce, we are supposed to help in the commercialization of this technology. So we need to interact with you. So this is the roadmap of our work. So BIS, working with you, technology developers, what are we looking for? We would like to, one, understand the stages of technology development. Second, we would like to identify pieces that can be controlled so that we do not control everything. Third, we want to really be able to specify, yes? Okay, we have 5 more minutes, and but this part is really important, and we have enough time to complete that, so. And then determine what level of control is appropriate. Should we control? There are different levels. It can be very stringent, it can be a little bit, and it can be a little lower. So that's how we come to you, so we can also understand that. But this is also for you guys. You technology developers, if you work with us, what are you going to get? It's not just one way, it's a give and take. So you will understand the essentials of export control regulations. You will properly classify technology you develop, because now you know how to classify them. If you can't, we are always there. You can ask us, submit a commodity classification request, and we will classify it for you. You will also, and this is very important, you will also be equipped to determine what? To determine tools that may be subject to control, and those that may not, the tools you use. You may become able to know that some of the research are fundamental and the outcome are not necessarily controlled. But also some of the research outcome may require certain control to certain countries. And you may become able to say, you know what? For some foreign nationals need license to access our facility, to access our research. So when we work together, we at BIS, at Commerce, we learn from you. But you, we also learn from us. And that will allow us to make regulations that are sound, that allow you to export very easily, make a lot of money, make our economy strong, and at the same time prohibit this technology to be acquired illegally by entities and countries of concern. So I think this is a very good summary where I would like to conclude on that. Thank you.
So with that summary, I will go directly to talk about intangible technology transfer. This is a topic that usually can be confusing to the industry themselves, as well as even to foreign government delegates. So they have lots of questions about this. And so I'll give you a brief overview of what it is all about. So under the, I'll talk about the Export Administration Regulations, which is EAR for short. And then of course, Dr. Tongili has already spoken about the ACRA, Export Control Reform Act. And we'll go over the intangible technology definitions according to the EAR. And then I'll cover a little bit about how we do our outreach and training, and then summarize. So I won't go into details about the part 730 to 774. So what we control is items. And when we talk about items, it's either the commodities, software, or technology. We also control exports, re-exports, and transfers. And this includes intangible transfers of software or technology, and exports can include an actual shipment of items, which is a material item out of the United States. And the release of technology, it can be considered an export if it is either all source code to a foreign person in the US, and that we call that as deemed exports. Okay, so the EAR controls activities of US persons and some foreign persons. So the ACRA is of 1758, talks about requirements to identify and control the export of emerging and foundational technologies. So now Dr. Tongale has mentioned briefly that these two terms have merged, and so we do not differentiate between emerging or foundational technologies anymore. In a sense, that's kind of a waste of time to do that. It's passing out what is foundational and what is emerging. Okay. So when you hear the term subject to the EAR, what is subject to the EAR? Basically, everything that is manufactured or invented in the US is subject to the EAR. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you require a license. That does not mean, it's a broad term. It's for anything that's either commercial or whatever that is subject to the EAR because it is either located in the US or invented in the US. And when we talk about an export or re-export of items that are subject, it requires authorized, it can be designated no license required, okay? So, and that the abbreviation is NLR. So again, as I mentioned, it does not automatically mean that a license required. An authorization can be a license or a license exception. So this is the important details I want to kind of go over intangible technology definitions. So when we talk about technology, it covers, and this is found in part 772.1. This can all be found online, obviously, on the BIS website. So when we talk about development, and I won't read the whole thing, it's whole paragraph, we talk about all the stages are involved in the production of a device, equipment, or anything. When it comes to production, it means how the items, machines, or whatever is developed. So it means all the terms that are incorporated under production. And in the case of use, this is an interesting part of it because use must include, and I have to emphasize this, all 6 criteria of use to require a license. So use means it has to cover operation, installation, maintenance, repair, overhaul, and refurbishing. If any of these terms or any of these characteristics fall out of it, it falls out of the requirement of a use technology. Okay, so in other words, if your equipment is already sent overseas or has already been exported, and somehow it requires a maintenance or an annual maintenance, and so a technician or somebody has to either go to that country to maintain it or to even give the technical SOPs of how to maintain the equipment. That doesn't necessarily trigger a use requirement, all right? So that can be done without any license application to the Department of Commerce, okay? So, but then again, be aware that the definition used differs for munition items, okay? So that will be found under category 6. So publicly available technology then is not subject to export controls. So this can be found in the general technology note. And this means that anything that is published is not under our jurisdiction. So if you can show a journal article or whatever, this is already publicly available. There's nothing to control about it, okay? Another term is fundamental research. So if fundamental research is done in an institute, a university, or or even if it's joint research, who knows, collaboration with a company, but if the results of research is going to be publicly, it's going to be published, then it is considered fundamental research, and there's no, in other words, Commons does not have jurisdiction over it. Okay, so what the intent is, you have to publish the results. It cannot be proprietary information. So in that sense, if it is proprietary information that's only kept within a company or something of that sort, then that proprietary information that's not going to be shared with the public, that could fall under if it's a technology that we control, then it will be under the Commons control list, okay? And again, patent information is, if it's already if the patent is approved or even applying for a patent, that removes it out of the Commons jurisdiction. But you can find all these, the details in all that parts that is listed in this slide, okay? Okay, thanks. So, so this is a term that is always generates a lot of confusion in that sense. So deemed export, what do you mean? What do we mean by deemed export? It's the release of technology or code to a foreign national that is located in the US. In other words, a foreign national that can be working for a company. And deemed re-export is a release of the technology or source code to a foreign national in a third country. Okay, so the important thing is how is this released? How is the technology released? Just by visual inspection of US origin equipment and facilities, that would be considered a deemed export. All exchanges of information in the US or abroad, okay, and application of personal knowledge or technical experience acquired in the US to situations that will benefit another country. So these are different ways of releasing technology. So as I mentioned before, we have various types of trainings, and you can find this training online, you know, and in that sense, we also have training all over the nation on a monthly basis, I think, now post-pandemic kind of thing, but it's online and it's free, and anybody who's interested in learning more about export controls can go online, and this is readily available. And for that, I will finish that. Oh, yes, I'm sorry. And contact information. This is the contact information for exporter services that can help you guys if you are ever curious of how we, whether your items or technology needs export license and so on. So that we have the DC numbers as well as the West Coast. And then, so this is all on our website. And thank you for your attention.
Okay, great. And I have somebody's phone.
Oh, that's mine.
Okay. Somebody want an extra phone. Okay, so now we have an opportunity to ask a few questions. I mean, you know, Blair is not up here at the moment, but I think what we heard from Tongeli's talk also is that there's this interest in having a collaborative community of conversations to push the technology forward. And Tongeli mentioned this multi-stakeholder process of bringing in academics, governments, and the private sector. And I think what Betty shared with us is there are insights that maybe are difficult for us to navigate without that kind of inside scoop and practitioner knowledge. So are there any questions that the group might have towards some of the points brought up today, or how to operationalize and work together?
Hi,
David.
David McMullen, FDA. I was wondering, is it possible to, when you think about these controls, think about future technologies instead of maybe current technologies? Like if you were to eventually think these medical devices don't need to be subject to these controls, but a future technology that might be able to be used for dual use might be able to, are you able to separate those?
Yeah. I'm going to try to respond to this question, but anyone can, Betty, you can also chip in there. For medical devices, if you go on our website, there is a slide that I have there hidden, you know, in the slide that you will get. BIS has on the website a list of medical devices that exist that are EAR 99, like the Deputy Assistant Secretary said, it's a basket. If it is not controlled, we put it there. If you see your item listed like EAR 99, hey, you are happy because you don't need a license for that. Just be careful who is receiving it, Cuba, Iran, or Sudan, I don't know, but you can just, so there's a list existing. But for things to come, this is where it is very important that we establish a relationship on how to work on determining what item and what national security interest is involved and what kind of control can be applied on that specific item.
We have a definition of medicine and medical devices in the EAR, and it's your definition, right? So if it is considered a medicine or a medical device by the FDA, it is for us. And for the most part, medicine and medical devices, I think, reflecting what Matt Borman said, they're not subject to our controls for a number of different reasons, values, ethics. We don't want to control these things. What you might find controlled is ancillary technologies, right? So, the one we always see is linear accelerators used in medical imaging, right? So they have nuclear end uses. They have other industrial end uses in terms of checking for cracks in, non-visible cracks in various installations, nuclear production facilities. And so they're controlled. But typically, the linear accelerators we see from the medical industry are specifically designed for a medical device, and therefore they get cut out from under our linear accelerator control, because we do have one. There's a statute which restricts the government from controlling medicine and medical devices as defined by the FDA unless they're multilaterally controlled. So we can't generally impose a unilateral control. There are some exceptions. In times of war, pretty much everything's off the table. But we generally don't and can't impose unilateral control. So you won't see. So what we're talking about here is not controls on the medical devices, almost definitionally, right? What we're looking at is what technologies might be developed in this area that will be spun off. And so, one thing somebody mentioned earlier is, maybe one of the triggers is when you start seeing the products you guys are developing advance normal human function. Maybe that's when we want to take a look at it and how it might contribute to the military functionality of another state. But as long as we're talking about, allowing people who can't type to type, this is almost definitionally a medical device and is not going to be a threat to anyone. So that's my evangelism on medical devices.
That's helpful clarification. Betty, did you want to weigh in? No. Okay. Next question, please. Your name and affiliation, please.
Hi, Stacey Elliott from Neuropace. I do have a question, and thankfully we've had a broad sweep of definitions because clearly definitions matter. So as much as we've been discussing, and particularly yesterday around technology, there are clearly definitions that impact manufacturing. And so when you look at the manufacturing definitions, are you specifically looking at components used in the technology within manufacturing, test methods within manufacturing, or manufacturing equipment that potentially could be used within the United States or exported outside of the United States?
Yes. When the export control applies to items, like end items, like a pen, like a piece of a component that go into an equipment or equipment itself. So these are end items. If they are determined to be controlled, then yes, these end items, component, parts, and the whole equipment, it can be controlled. And they are listed also. So if it is listed, it is controlled. But, and it can be the whole equipment, but it can also be the process. So that's a little bit to answer the question.
if you look at our export control classification numbers, it's an alphanumeric, right? So we have a category number 1 through 9, which very loosely defines the thing. So for example, 9 is aviation, right? So these are things used in aviation. And then we have a letter, which is A through D, right? A means an end item. B typically means production equipment. C is materials, ABC. D is software, right? So in any piece of equipment, you're going, so let's think about process control equipment. It's turning on and off a pump somewhere in a chemical manufacturing facility. We might control the software that runs the equipment, will control the pump. And so, for example, the pump is 2B350, so it's production equipment. And then the chemical that comes out the other end of the pipe could be controlled as a chemical weapons precursor. So in answer to your question, yes, production equipment, test equipment, the end item, but we try to be selective. We don't want to control just a polyurethane pipe. We want to control the pumps. Thanks.
Sir, please join us. Please have a seat. Let's put a seat for you. Okay. Matt.
Betty, thank you so much for talking about deemed export, because I think that's one of the things that has this group maybe like most puzzled as to how that would be implemented, especially in a situation where, let's say that there's large buy-in into the idea that this class of medical devices wouldn't be subject to export control, but perhaps there's like this niche thing, like application that everyone thinks, yeah, we should be careful of that. But then and I think we'll probably hear more about this today, like in terms of like actual hardware capabilities, there might be physical, like there may be overlap between the things. Mm-hmm. And then like, how would it work with foreign nationals that are working at a university or a company that are working on kind of the good technology? But I don't know, like, could you think of case examples where these kinds of things are navigated and it's not onerous to the organizations?
Mm.
Is it on?
When,
Yeah.
When we talk about deemed export, you go from, first of all, you answer the question, is deemed, okay, I don't need all 3 microphones. That's intimidating. It's not working. Okay, thanks. First of all, you start from whether your item or your technology has an ECCN, which is called the Export Control Classification Number. You start from there. If it has, then that's when you want to worry about deemed export. If right now, as BCI is not controlled under the CCL, I mean, there's not even, is not listed, right? So if you go in the CCL and you look at, I can think of one. Oh, okay, I know. An item that is used in processing pharmaceuticals, such as a fermenter, let's say tangential flow filtration, that is controlled in the Commerce Control List. So if anyone wants to work in the company that makes this type of equipment, then they will have to worry about deemed export, in the sense that if they're trying to improve on their product already, okay, the product is already controlled. If they're trying to improve on it or make the next generation product, and that would be probably under technology for the production of something or whatever, that's when, if the company hires foreign nationals, if that's the case, then that company will have to apply for deemed export licenses, which is good for 4 years. And it's usually is about the same time as their the visa. If the work visa will expire a certain date, then the deemed export license will expire in the same year or something that sort. That is when the company will have to apply for a deemed export license. Does that answer your question?
Just add a little bit. Take a look at
Microphone,
your,
please.
the research equipment, the production, and the equipment equipment in your production line if you're producing something. If that equipment is controlled, and again, going to what Matt Borman said, if that equipment is controlled, then the technology to produce it is controlled. And you can transfer that technology by giving a foreign national access to that equipment. So look at your equipment. Don't think about the technology you're producing quite yet, because that's not really subject to our control. Look at the equipment that you're using, and that's when you're going to need a deemed export license. We are extending our controls, especially over certain destinations. So we're beginning to move into some fairly low-level equipment, especially in the academic context. So we might be getting down into FTIRs and things like that, which you might even find in a high school chemistry lab. So there's issues there, but don't think about the technology, think about the equipment that the individual will be using.
Okay, great. We have a virtual question. I want to make sure we only have 5 minutes left. So from Philip Sabes, question for the panel. An issue that has come up several times is how early proactive regulation should be if a technology might have military use down the road. To what extent can that decision be biased or biased by the humanitarian factor that the primary use is medical? Kind of, we've come back to this a few times. Does anyone want to take that?
Yeah, I'm just going to make a quick comment on that. And you are lucky to be here. Please take the phone number of Barry and Ted. Don't take mine. Every question, direct to them, and they will really give you good help. Now there's a humanitarian system, bias. It comes in the context of Russia, because now it's like a blanket with Russia's unfair occupation and destructive war in Ukraine. We're trying to control everything except when there's a humanitarian. It's going to help people in Russia, then it becomes a bias that can help, allow this kind of exports. So that's all I can say in that context.
Yeah, so this is an end use issue, right? So as Tongeli said, we license products, and for the most part, we approve the vast majority of licenses we get to any destination. So I think we did in our division, we did something like almost 5,000 licenses last year. We denied 60. So to give you an idea of how we work, for the most, there's also self-selection, right? So people are not submitting licenses that they know are going to be denied, but we approve most of them. And in the context of humanitarian, we might take a look at a controlled item and say, well, this is going, we know that the non-governmental organization that's going to use it, it's used for a humanitarian purpose, even though it's controlled for a variety of reasons. We manage an interagency process in our license processing. And on the humanitarian standpoint, usually State Department will step in and say, hey, we're pumping a lot of money into this country to save lives. This is part of that program.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you. So we're pretty much at the end of our time. So what I'd like to do is invite the people in line each to pose their question.
Thank you. The talks this morning have been tremendously helpful. Brief two-part question. My understanding is that under the Export Control Reform Act of 2018, Neurotech was not specifically identified, but the technical advisory committees were established to recommend new and emerging technologies to look into. I'm wondering if there's any way to collaborate with people from the TACs that recommended looking into BCIs and Neurotech so that the people in the field can more deeply understand the concerns that motivated that. And also, Commerce has recently done a lot of work on AI. A lot of components go into AI, so your processes have had to be very discriminating in a positive way about what to control and what not to. I'm wondering if there's room to talk about leveraging those processes to understand how that might work in the BCI context or other technologies. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. Lucy, please introduce yourself also.
Hi, Lucy Turnus at the Institute of Neuroethics. I have a quick point of clarity, and you might not have an answer yet, but how does the Department of Commerce see its authority over, I understand your point, we don't handle medical devices, but the FDA approves medical device, but the FDA doesn't have, secondary usage or fall under practice of medicine. So how does the Commerce have any position on off-label usage or when it would interfere with practice of medicine generally?
Okay, is there anyone else in line? Okay. Just a brief response from anyone on either of those questions?
Yeah, for the first question about the neuro, I will be running the emerging technology at BIS, and we are building a robust team, and we will be interacting with all the 14 categories and others that are not explicitly listed there. So if you can take my number, we can really further this conversation. Thank you.
And I'd like to recommend having strong panelists like I did to answer these questions. And on the second question, I didn't understand it, so come and talk to me.
Thank you. Actually, did you want to say anything in closing about your navigations with these multi-stakeholder collaborations and thinking about regulation?
It just goes to show that there's a lot more questions that have gone unanswered for some time. And this is the point of collaboration. This is the point of communication. This needs to continue, right? If this doesn't, the technologies that the community that we care about will never get to them. The need will always be unmet. And this is where the starting point is. So I advise you to continue to have these conversations, these gatherings, force clarity, and let's move together as an economy.
Thank you.
And there will be no white flags.
Okay.
White flag.
All right. So with that, we have about an 8-minute break. So go ahead and refresh your coffee, and then we'll get started with the next section on misuse and dual use.
I really like that. No white flags. That was my, it touched me so much. If you ever need some clarity on that, we really don't. Okay, so that's there were many of these slides that answered some of the questions.
Thanks for.
Guess my window, bringing back sweet memories. I can't stand the rain against my window, 'cause he's not here with me. Whoa, empty pillow where his head used to lay. I know you got some sweet memories, but like the window, you ain't me. Yeah, when the rain, do you remember how sweet it used to be? When we was together, everything was so grand. Now that we parted, there's just one sound that I just can't stand. I can't stand the rain against my window, bringing back sweet memories. I can't stand the rain against my window, 'cause he's not here with me. Whoa, empty pillow
keeps on haunting me. Hey, get off my window.
As a full-time roller skater, I would get tax paperwork, the I-9s, the invoices, 1099s. It can be a headache, but with TurboTax, it was a sigh of relief. TurboTax makes it easy to get my taxes done, even if my situation changes.
Lying around home alone on a rainy night like this. I'm so tired of being alone. I'm so tired of on my own. Won't you help me, girl, just as soon as you can? People say that I found a way to make you say that you love me. Hey, baby, you didn't go for that. It's a natural fact that I wanna come back. Show me where it's at, baby. I'm so tired of being alone. I'm so tired of on my own. Won't you help me, girl, soon as you can? I guess you know that I love you so, even though you don't want me no more. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm crying tears all through the years. I tell you like it is, honey, love me if you will. Baby, I'm tired of being alone here by myself now. I tell you, I'm tired, baby. I'm tired of being all wrapped up late at night. In my dreams, nobody but you, baby. Sometime I wonder if you love me like you say you do. You see, baby, I've been thinking about it, yeah. And I've been wanting to get next to you, baby. You see, sometimes I fool moms, I say, oh, oh, baby. Hey, needing you has proven to me to be my greatest dream. Yeah. I'm so tired, baby. Yeah. You don't know what I'm talking about. Sometimes in at night I get to wonder about you, baby. Oh, baby, baby. Call me, call me, call me. What a beautiful time we had together. Now it's getting late and we must leave each other. Yeah. Just remember the time we had and how right I tried to be. It's all in the day, cold losing your love, acting foolishly. Hey, go on and take your time, 'cause you're only losing me. Love is a long ways from here. Tell you it's all in the way you feel.
the world. While recent investments and developments in neurotechnology have increased, global guidance to proactively address ethical issues in neurotechnology have been produced for at least 14 years, and with a more rapid pace in recent few years. From largely the academic community of researchers who are funded by national governments, there's been a concerted effort to integrate ethical consideration of neuroscience into all of the large-scale national-level brain research projects. For example, U.S. past President Obama made it the focus of his bioethics commission. Neuroethical issues were noted as critical importance in the U.S. Brain Initiative, and I know Nick back there especially cares about that. Arlene and I were part of the International Brain Initiative, a consortium that started of the 7 existing large-scale and emerging brain research projects around the globe. The IBI noted in their declaration of intent that neuroethics is a priority in order to make good on that collectively $7 billion of investment. Our work with the IBI and our respective brain initiatives, such as the US Brain Initiative and the EU Human Brain Project, has primarily involved integrating ethical considerations throughout the research lifecycle. And Arlene will speak a bit more about her process, specifically with the Human Brain Project next in the context of dual use. We've also seen guidance emerging from policy entities around the globe. The first international standard in responsible innovation for neurotechnology was facilitated through a multi-year, multi-stakeholder process by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD. The OECD is a transnational policy entity comprised of 38 member countries. Advance this to see something. Okay, it's stuck. 38 member countries. The standard was adopted by the OECD as a legal instrument in December 2019. And by 2024, all 38 member countries, which includes the US, are expected to report how they have implemented the recommendation. An implementation guide is in the process of review, which was co-developed with many members of our team in the Institute, which will call out suggested actions tailored to specific stakeholders, from policy entities to the private sector. I think this is not working. More recently, oh, there it is. The global discussion around neuroethics has revived conversations from the late 90s around cognitive liberty, a movement that more recently uses the term neural rights. Neural rights calls for the creation of new human rights law. Chile is pioneering bills and amendments to its constitution to explore protection of brain-derived data, as well as rights to concepts like mental continuity. And for those interested, Arlene, Amanda, and I have co-authored a paper in Science Diplomacy that shares lessons learned from that experience, including the need to carefully delineate terms like neurotechnology, as well as concepts like mental continuity. A lack of that kind of clarity for the previous proposals has resulted in criticism and concern from Chilean clinicians, scholars, and advocacy groups. A fruitful path forward would involve a process of public engagement wherein publics for whom rights are being drafted are involved in the dialogue. Although more proposals proliferate, the Council of Europe, an organization whose mandate is to uphold human rights law, and the UNESCO's International Bioethics Committee, whose mandate is to ensure respect for human dignity and freedom, each independently concluded that instead of novel human rights, we need to tailor and specify existing human rights law and regulation to neurotech in specific contexts. In October 2022, at the UN Human Rights Council, there was a unanimous adoption of the proposal to look more deeply into how existing human rights law might meet the potential infringement to human rights related to neurotech, and a full report will be available in fall this year. In the meantime, several policy entities have identified gaps in regulation of neurotechnology in the consumer context, as was mentioned by Anna yesterday, and gaps in protections against discrimination related to inferences made from brain data, such as interpreting past, current, and future mental and disease states from data collected from the brain. What has also become clear is how important it is to engage the private sector ecosystem, who have been largely absent from those conversations. They are critical to this conversation. You are critical to this conversation, as you are often in the driver's seat of translating and making these tech available to the wider public. This is why we're excited about today's event. Now, if we just consider for the purposes of discussion, law on a continuum from soft to hard law, we find that the hard law end, that most concerns with neuro and mental data, for example, can be captured under the umbrella of existing law, but require deeper clarification, interpretation, and definition to be practically applied to neuroscience. Legal adaptation and construction of law generally is a long process that may be unable to keep pace with the needs of rapidly developing technology, the so-called pacing problem. So, soft law is often favored for addressing ethical issues in emerging technologies in hopes that these instruments can be nimbler and more responsive in this area. We've seen quite a bit of activity in this area, including broad guidance developed by professional groups, largely academic and policy-making entities, including principles, consensus documents, and advice and recommendations. Our research team, including Lucy Turnus, will be speaking later this afternoon. And we've analyzed the existing guidance. There are about 20 sets of ethical guidance on neurotechnology, which is nothing compared to the approximately 200 of AI ethics guidance, but it's still significant and still often redundant. And frankly, a lot of people still don't read them. We found in our analysis of existing guidance key themes, and these include the following, which all seem relevant in our discussion of misuse and dual use. And that includes safety, mitigating risk and protecting privacy interests, equity and justice, how to ensure access, inclusion, and prevent often unintentional discrimination and stigma, and a bucket of agency, autonomy, identity, wherein upgrading consent processes, mitigating risk of manipulation, and proactively addressing questions of challenges to humanness are recommended. We identified from this analysis also that from our recent collaborations that some challenges for implementing the guidance were related to inconsistent definitions and scoping of terms like neurotechnology and neurodata, on proposed protections that were put forward, concepts like mental continuity, and I might even suggest dual use would be another, which we'll discuss next. And all of these would benefit from a broader conversation with lived experience advocates and public engagement. There's also a lack of specificity on which actors could take action. There's a mismatch between actors in governance and policy instruments, and there are gaps in jurisdiction of regulation. And finally, we have the pacing problem, where we need to understand the timeline for which tools called for could be developed, given how long it takes to develop certain tools. And before us, we have opportunities to offer near-term actions, such as self-governance tools and setting community-wide codes of conduct. And this could include considerations for contexts that would be deemed misuse. We can also develop toolkits for regulators and practitioners to use proactively and form subject matter expertise working groups, like a preliminary one that we've established today, to raise awareness of the state of the art and engage in foresight for potential contexts for misuse. For example, through the OECD, some member countries have created collaborative communities of policymakers, private sector, neurotech innovators, and ethicists who have worked to create a shared charter and code of conduct. And in the intermediate and longer term, we can work to set standards and international agreements. The IEEE, the largest international engineering society in the world, has a standards association that many of you may be familiar with, and I and others are part of a new standard group to develop a socio-technical standard for neurotechnology, wherein technical developments will integrate ethical consideration and benchmarks. And there's an organization called Brain Mind that's working to cultivate best practices in the neurotech investor and entrepreneurial ecosystem. And I'm glad we've put lived experience advocates at the front and center of both days, as we need those communities invited to conversations wherein decisions are being made that will have impacts on their lives and possibly the ability to continue to be the narrator of their own lives. So the take home I'd like to share with the group today is that we need a multi-level strategy for greatest ethical coverage and oversight. And a multi-level approach will assure that we are creating the most societally beneficial technologies that are both ethically and economically sustainable. And to do so, we need to make sure that we create inclusive communities of diverse stakeholders to develop solutions that are relevant and implementable. Thank you.
Okay, hello everybody. My name is Arlene Sales. I'm here representing Ionics. I will be talking about dual use, and my reflections will be largely based on my experiences working in the European Human Brain Project from 2014 until now. I just stopped a couple of days ago, literally. Of course, you will see that many of my comments are very much informed by my work within the HBP. I will present some of the lessons we learned working on dual use in the HBP, and I will emphasize the need to engage in multidisciplinary, inclusive dialogue in order to shed some light on the ethical, social, regulatory aspects of neurotechnology and the security issues it is associated with. So let's see whether this works for me. Yes. Okay, so let's start with definitions. And of course, we could spend 2-3 hours on definitions. I know I'm just barely going to scratch the surface here. The notion of dual use has received attention, but it remains controversial and contested. Axiomatically, dual use, in fact, means research and technology referring to findings or products that can be used for more than one purpose. So it could be medical and non-medical purposes. The thing with this definition is that it is accurate, dual use is that, but it is useless because in fact, this is not what people have in mind when they think of dual use. What they are thinking is the problem of dual use. And the problem of dual use can be reduced to the tension between, on one hand, the promise of scientific progress, and on the other hand, the potential harm or threat to humans. So that's the problem of dual use. And this problem particularly is usually understood in terms of this dichotomy between military applications and civilian applications. So there is a tendency to look at dual use in that limited way. I say limited because there have been calls for expanding this, for not limiting ourselves to this distinction between the military and the civilian. And in fact, it is true that in some contexts, that might be the right interpretation, probably in this context, that might be the right interpretation, but definitely that doesn't appear to fully capture all the potential dual uses that one can think of. So the concept of dual use has been applied to several areas, including neuroscience. In fact, it has been argued that neuroscience and its products are particularly attractive for use in security, the military, intelligence, and this is why some neuroethicists have argued that neuroscience and neurotechnology are inherently dual-use fields. So they believe that this is an essential, almost a key aspect of those disciplines. So, considering how common it is to think that neuroscience and neurotechnology is particularly vulnerable to dual uses, of course, that became a topic very important for the Human Brain Project. I'm not going to talk a lot about the Human Brain Project, but I want to briefly stop on the second goal, to achieve a more integrated understanding of the human brain, leading to medical and technological applications. Of course, from the beginning, the goal of the Human Brain Project has been to further our understanding of the brain, not only because knowing the brain is good in itself and gives us a better understanding of what we are, but also and importantly, because of applications. So obviously there is a lot of interest in translation. Now, the thing is that, of course, this is the goal, and the goal is to benefit humanity, and that's the way it has been put many times. At the same time, the Human Brain Project has been committed to addressing ethical and societal issues raised by the research and applications from the very beginning. That meant that it had to consider dual-use issues, insofar as there was a commitment to address ethical and social issues, and insofar as the interest was to benefit humanity, we had to consider exactly what the possibilities could be and whether there could be any type of dual-use applications. By the way, the commitment of the HBP to analysis of ethical and societal considerations is shown by the fact that 5% of the budget was allocated to research in the humanities and the social sciences, and that's quite significant in a science project. So in any case, what did we do then? What we did is we wrote an opinion. An opinion, or what we call opinions, are joint documents. That is, documents written, produced by the group. And in fact, I say we wrote an opinion. In fact, the opinion is the result of research from the social sciences, the humanities. We worked together with neuroscientists. We had engagement activities with a number of publics, and not only lay citizens, but also diverse stakeholders. And the opinion is entitled Opinion on Responsible Dual Use, Political Security, Intelligence, and Military Research. You can see already that we try to go beyond the military-civilian dichotomy. We actually try to specifically include intelligence, political uses, and so on. And we the opinion is importantly shaped by responsible research and innovation. So we will discuss this, or I will briefly tell you what it is in a few slides. The opinion then consists on a definition of dual use in neuroscience, and then on what our approach has been, and then finally we issued some recommendations to different stakeholders, the HBP, the EU, diverse actors, and so on. In its approach to dual uses of concern, the RRI framework has played a key role. So I would like to explain briefly what the RRI framework or Responsible Research and Innovation Framework is, particularly because it has been a key component in European research in the last 10 years or so. So RRI, or Responsible Research and Innovation, is, and I'm quoting, this is the EC, the European Commission, an approach that anticipates and assesses potential implications and societal expectations with regards to research and innovation, with the aim to foster the design of inclusive and sustainable research and innovation. So I want to point to the terms anticipate and assess, because I think this is a key aspect, which I'm going to come back to later. Also, societal actors, researchers, citizens, policymakers, business, third sector organizations, work together during the whole research and innovation process in order to better align both the process and its outcomes with the values, needs, and expectations of society. So I also want to stop briefly here, because what we're talking about is the alignment on societal needs and desires with the goals of the scientific and innovation agenda. So this is very important for in the RRI framework that we were charged with implementing in the HPP, just because this was a project that received public funding, and that's what we had to do. It was how the research needed to be conducted. So, what are the characteristics? RRI is an interactive process. It entails mutual responsiveness and joint reflection. Again, this idea of thinking together, and we have heard quite a bit yesterday and today about this thinking together and collaborative communities and so on. But it is interesting to see that this became a key aspect in European research projects. Joint reflection on the purpose of science and outcomes. This goes beyond a narrow construction of ethics, simply as applied ethics or safety assessment. And let me add something else here, or ethics police. Unfortunately, many times there is a tendency to interpret ethics as if, in a very adversarial way. So if the ethicists come, we're in trouble because they're going to say no. And actually, that's not at all what the Commission, certainly not at all what RRI tries to do. The idea is that ethics helps, assists, makes the research more responsible, mindful, and so on. So ethics collaborates, co-creates with science and innovation. It's not supposed to act as the police and in a very adversarial way. Then we have also development, legal, ethical, and social issues should fit into the scientific research agenda from the very beginning. This is also another important point that yesterday, one of the questions raised by Anna was when do we, 1 minute? Oh my gosh. Okay, so let me run now. I wanted to make the connection between the question of when that Anna raised yesterday, and in RRI, it would be as soon as possible at the beginning. The whole process should be shaped by this constant collaboration between different publics. So some key insights. Identification of research and technology of concern is not straightforward. This is key. It's not easy. We do not have, and after working on this for many, many years, we did not end up with a list of things that were no. Actually, what we end up with is a process that allows researchers and innovators together to discuss the issues, to reflect on the issues in order to seek better solutions. Am I done? Okay, so finish really fast, but this is not helping. Okay, so I have a paper with colleagues where we actually describe very carefully this process that I just very barely discussed. And the idea is, what do we do then? What do we need to do in order to be able to address issues, dual-use issues in a responsible way? Create diverse training and awareness-raising activities. This is key. And training and awareness-raising means that we all talk about these issues and we raise the issues and discuss them also in a safe space where questions and concerns by different publics can be easily asked, freely discussed without any kind of second-guessing the motivations of anybody. So I have to wrap up. Bottom line, it entails experimentation, learning, and dialogue. We can continue in the Q&A. Thank you.
Well, we'll get my slides back up. I will say I'm Mike Walmetz, and I am definitely a pro-BCI, but I'm a little hesitant to actually use that term because it sounds like the alternative is pro-choice. So we'll think more about that. So I come to you from the Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory. I'm the program manager for our Human and Machine Intelligence program, which is most of our brain-computer interface and other neuroscience research, as well as some of our machine learning research. And we really do work at the intersection of many areas here, from implanted and non-invasive brain-computer interface, restoration and augmentation, and the intersection, neuroscience and physics, AI, robotics. We do pioneering research, but always with mission intent, and things at the chronic and acute stages as well. And all the comments here are my own. Just to note for the folks that don't know, they associate Johns Hopkins with the School of Medicine and the hospital, which is a very big part, the biggest part of Hopkins. The Applied Physics Laboratory is another component. We're located in Laurel, Maryland, halfway between DC and Baltimore. We are the country's largest and oldest university-affiliated research center. That basically means that all the work that we do is with and for the DoD and the intelligence community. And our purpose is to create defining innovations that ensure our nation's preeminence in the 21st century. And on the right-hand side, I have a few of the historical defining innovations of APL over its 80-year history, starting with the proximity fuse, which is one of the key innovations in helping World War II. It is hard to shoot down planes when you are in a plane, and one of the founding technology for APL was to develop technology to have a proximity fuse, or to be able to not have to hit the plane, but get close enough and actually have a little bit of quote unquote artificial intelligence on the missile so that it knew when it could explode. Since that time, we've done many other things. It's a big place, but we do a lot of work in brain-computer interface, and I will touch on these topics here. At first, I was a little worried about coming so late in the program. Everything that needs to be said probably will have been said by now. So I took down some notes on the things that I think has not really been said, or certain important things that haven't been raised, and I'll focus on those. So here is my list of relevant topics, or that I think may be relevant, that have not yet been covered or not really fully covered. And I'll just list them, make a few comments on them, and maybe we can take up some more discussion and questions later. The first one that struck me was non-human BCI. This is an area that maybe is not on everyone's radar, but there are companies that are developing technologies primarily with the focus on detection dogs and other animals, rodents and dogs, to be able to take advantage of their olfactory systems. And this is a technology that clearly has national security applications, does not have any clinical applications, but is probably something that we'll see in the near term, depending on its efficacy and other factors. So I just want to make the folks involved aware of these other areas of BCI that are beyond clinical purposes. I think another topic, we've talked a bit about neuroethics, and that was starting today especially, but international neuroethics landscape is another important topic. So I think that there was an example given yesterday about a foreign colonel with a brainstem stroke, and would we really be concerned about providing some restoration of function to that individual? But that's not what we're talking about, because there are a variety of interpretations of neuroethics, across the globe. So I think that is another relevant topic here. Standard performance metrics and independent validation and evaluation is another important one, and one that's close to my heart. I came to APL 10 years ago. I've been at Hopkins for 18 years, but I came to APL 10 years ago because that was sort of the beginning of the replication crisis in many of the sciences, and we really didn't know what to do about it. And I had heard about how DARPA and IARPA have independent test and evaluation on many of their programs. And this is not, IV&V for things that are going to be deployed, but actually validating the claims that researchers are making at early stages. And I thought this is a great way to address this. Now, things have evolved in the last decade, but the value of independent validation is very clear, especially for things where we are evaluating research claims to make policy decisions. Another topic is mission pull for BCI. So, NIH is a big funder of BCI research, but there are others. And I'll just point out one example. In December, the Defense Threat Reduction Agency added a topic to their BAA on brain-computer interface. The Defense Threat Reduction Agency is the organization that basically looks at chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear, and explosive threats, and their operators have to operate in very hazardous environments. And it turns out that the environments that they operate in and the constraints posed upon them actually make their use cases somewhat similar to the assistive technologies and restoration function use cases that we focused on here. The role of AI beyond increasing BCI performance. So that's, we've seen some examples of language models being used to clean up sort of noisy neural signals, but there are others. And then also next generation non-surgical neurotechnologies. And we have Al Amandi back there, who started the DARPA NQ program, and APL is one of the performers on this program. We focused on today's non-invasive neurotechnologies, but we hope that we will see some advances in the near future. I will also do something for the first time today, but I expect that I will be doing this much more, and you guys will as well. I will cite ChatGPT on this slide, in that I was inspired by the fortune cookies that were given yesterday. I don't know if everyone opened theirs, but you should have, because they were specific to, the fortunes were brain-computer interface specific fortunes, and so credit to the organization that delivered those. So I had ChatGPT write this fortune for this slide. Okay, I'm trying to advance. Just very briefly, I will note that we've been involved in a lot of brain-computer interface research over the last 15 years, starting with work on revolutionizing prosthetics. This is another revolutionizing prosthetics participant, Jan Sherman, and she's feeding herself a chocolate bar. But we did look at what else could Jan do with her brain-computer interface. I think the point was brought up earlier about when will we start to see examples of augmentation, and we've seen many examples of the potential for this, not necessarily with national security implications or for strategic advantage for the United States, but we asked Jan to control a flight simulator using her implant. And I agree that we will not be controlling planes with our minds. There is no value in that. But the value in doing this, in doing some of these experiments, was to assess whether there is some other value in directly interfacing with technology. Here, within an hour, Jan reported a real sense of embodiment that I'm not sure we all experience, where Jan said, "I am the plane. I am at one with the plane." Now, we did not follow up with any rigorous experiments assessing this, so there's some open questions there. Other examples of, let's say, augmentation are in participants who we focus on stimulation and restoring the sense of touch. There are clear clinical applications for that. There are sensors, for example, in the fingertips of our modular prosthetic limb, so we can restore a sense of touch to these participants. But what else can they do? If you have sensors there, you can touch infrared light, and we've done demonstrations of that. You can touch virtual objects in augmented reality. Those are things that you and I cannot do, but one can do with a brain-computer interface, and invasive participants are able to do those things. In this example of AI BCI shared perception, this was an older study with the company Second Sight, and I used to love to show this video. This is an individual who has retinitis pigmentosa. She's blind. She has a camera. It is feeding information into her optic nerve. It's very poor information. So you can sort of navigate hallways, but not really tell one object from another. But even 5 or 6 years ago, we had enough computer vision to be able to use that to help. So she would ask, "Show me the cup." the computer vision would identify the cup and highlight those pixels in her very low-res implant, and she could reach out and grab the cup. And she is so overjoyed about this, she says, and it's sort of a Siri voice, it's like a female voice that is interacting with her, and she says, I love her, when can I buy her? And I was so, it's always like a very touching, moment in the video, but as many of you know, Second Sight went out of business, and so she will never be able to buy her. She will likely be able to buy something else in the future. And then next generation non-surgical interfaces. This is really emerging, and I'm not going to show anything that is unpublished, but I will briefly mention results that are unpublished. We have evidence in rodents, and now we are transitioning to humans, where we're showing order of magnitude better non-invasive ability to record neural information using optical techniques, and I can follow up with that later. So with that, I will just leave you with this article. You'll probably have to read it while I walk off stage, but this is about sort of technology forecasting. And this is a New York Times article from 1958 from Frank Rosenblatt, who is the great-great-grandfather of deep learning. He developed the perceptron, and I'll just read this. Later perceptrons, Dr. Rosenblatt said, will be able to recognize people and call out their names. Printed pages, longhand letters, and even speech commands are within its reach. Only one more step of development, a difficult step, he said, is needed for the device to hear speech in one language and instantly translate it to speech or writing in another language. So predicting all of the advances that we're experiencing in the last 5 years in 1958 before, when people probably would have called this hype. Thank you very much.
Presentations, especially that first one. No, there are a lot of good presentations for this, and I think it gave us some important food for thought. As Mike pointed out, there's a lot of additional considerations, and the purpose of today was really just to lay some, and yesterday was to lay out some of the possibilities. But we'll clearly need to reiterate on these considerations, and both Arlene and Mike have brought up some topics that we need to continue to address in order to truly help all of us move fruitfully forward with the ethical strategy, but also BIS. So at this point, we have a few minutes for questions before break. Is there anyone who, from virtually or in person, who would like to boldly ask a question to this panel? And I know, Lee, maybe you had a question that came over from the last session, but if you'd like to speak too.
Only because invited. Thank you, Karen. I won't ask the question from earlier because actually Amanda had asked it far better than I could have, so I sat down at that point.
Oh, okay.
But a couple of you, maybe all three in some ways, touched a little bit on the importance of the privacy of neural data, but didn't focus on that point. This is an opportunity, maybe just to ask you to dig a little bit deeper on your collective committee's considerations of what we really mean about privacy of neural data and how this important community should be thinking about that.
Yeah, thank you for asking that. And I wonder if I could, I certainly have some comment, but I wonder, Arlene, if the HBP Human Brain Project also put out a Data Privacy and Opinion Act that specified some of that conversation around privacy interests. Could you mind sharing a little bit about that?
I mean, we were particularly interested in, again, first unveiling the conceptual issues, what kind of privacy, how to understand privacy, what are privacy interests, and on the basis of that, we created an opinion where that again was based on engagement activities with publics to see what they were interested in, what they thought, and what, in practical terms, that resulted in a data protection working group that is still operative, very much addressing all the privacy issues that might arise in each of the scientific work packages. So again, as shown, very consistent with our approach in general, we have been very much guided by constant conversations without providing formulas, really constant conversations to see how we all together can address issues, determine the relevance of those issues, and how to co-create solutions to those issues. So it's been very collaborative enterprise.
Mike, do you want to weigh in?
Yeah, just very briefly, I would consider what national security vulnerabilities that might be associated with neural data as well. For example, Fitbits. I think you probably heard stories about how Fitbit information can be used in ways to track or learn things about soldiers. And you can imagine, and maybe there are ways still left to be imagined, of ways neural data could be used for strategic purposes.
Okay, thank you for that. There's an active debate around the uniqueness of neurodata or not, or even whether neurodata is the word of the thing we should be concerned about. I think, in short, you know, a lot of preliminary legal analysis has suggested that in many ways, brain data, electrical signals, derived electrical activity that's measured, numbers that come out, are maybe not different than biometric data in one sense. But in another sense, laws also work on social norms and social concerns. And part of what we've heard even yesterday was that there seems to be even culturally something different about the brain. So anything that you derive from it seems to require a different kind of intimacy and regard. So whether that regard translates into special protections for data derived in that way is something that has to be tailored to addressing particular types of privacy interests. So there are privacy interests, there are many categories of privacy, and some of them might include decisional privacy, so an ability to make certain decisions based on what kind of data is required from you. Some of them are proprietary privacy, can I own it? And which is a strategy that many companies have taken to try to mitigate, which I'm not sure is actually the right way forward. And then there are others related to kind of a portrayal of oneself and your identity. And so the concerns that have been identified preliminarily from international policy entities looking into this, largely spurred by the neural rights conversation, is that there is one unique gap area with brain-derived data, and maybe more broadly, a better scope is mental data. But for brain data, it's that the types of inferences made are not protected in the ways that other biometric data. Thank you, fire truck. So that is the gap area right now, that the inferences are different. What it tells about you is different because it can tell past, present, and future predictions in ways that genetic data, for instance, couldn't. So that's where the gap is right now. But thank you for that question. I answered really long, but somebody else want to move forward? Thank you, Lee, for kicking us off.
So thank you for those really great panels, panel. So, you know, the occasion that has brought, you know, this really multi-stakeholder group together today is export controls. You know, whether or not, you know, whatever happens with the export control conversation, do you think there are other issues that, you know, are important, thinking about ethics and the BCI, you know, BCI is moving forward? What other issues do you think are important for, if any, do you think are important for a multi-stakeholder community to be addressing moving forward? Neural privacy, I mean, brain data was mentioned, but interested in any others.
Thank you. Well, I think there are kind of two buckets. I mean, BCI export control in this conversation is particularly around probably a narrow view of what dual use is. But there are broader concerns around specifically how, even in the clinical context, you know, how certain technologies might be used. I actually can't say some of the things that I know. But there are ways that brain technologies can intervene with the brain and alter decision-making processes and how you perceive the world. And it's also hard to predict what those are going to be. And those are types of considerations where participants and patients as research partners have been and continue to be really helpful and probably need to be deployed more. So I applaud a lot of the companies here, and patient advocacy groups have already been included in that process. The other piece is around privacy. I mean, a lot of conceptions around privacy are muddied and not very sophisticated. So there's this idea that privacy is some kind of black or white thing, but there's a lot of little things in there that some patients really don't care about, and there's other aspects that they do. And those are the types of things that we need to be protecting against. And there needs to be a certain awareness raising to understand what the state of the art is for what realistic possibility is. And I will mention there's risk of not just technology hype, but ethics hype that we have to mitigate in that way.
I can add that I think that an interesting topic is the evolving relationship between industry, academia, and government. This is one that we've seen in machine learning and AI, very quickly evolve over the last decade. I'll go back to Frank Rosenblatt and the perceptron of 1958. He was funded by the Navy to do that. And for decades, many decades, most of the work that was done was funded by public organizations. That's not the case today. While there are some innovations that are funded by DARPA, IARPA, NSF, the vast majority, especially the ones that we have come to see make all the headlines in the last few months, are privately funded. And so I wonder whether we are going to see some type of change in that direction with brain-computer interface.
Thank you. I'll say a few words. I mean, there are so many issues that we could discuss and so many gaps. I agree in that. Following what Mike said, I agree that it would be good to engage more forcefully with the private sector. I think that is very important, of course, government as well. But in neuroethics, there has been definitely a void when it comes to engaging with some actors that really play an important role. So that's one thing that I think we as neuroethicists need to continue to address. The other thing, though, is what we need to fight against is a misconception that all we need is compliance, ethics compliance. Yeah. And I think that is a huge and a very serious problem because, for example, in the case of data protection in the EU, we know we follow the GDPR, and that's fine. And many people think that that is more than enough. So that means that there are a number of potential issues. I'm not saying actual issues, but potential issues that are not explored because, after all, we already have regulation. And I think that that is a dangerous attitude. And what is important is to understand that there are always issues that may go beyond existing regulation. And that's why we need to continually address them, which is not, again, going back to a point that Karen made earlier, which is not to call for further regulation. I'm not saying so, therefore we have to regulate more. What I'm saying is it would be good to be aware of potential issues. So we can co-create solutions and we can examine a number of solutions. And in the next panel, this will be part of the discussion. What are possible risk mitigation and so on. But examine the issues, talk about them. Let's be aware of them and discuss them all together.
Hey, Matt.
I'm really glad that you said hype, and I think it's interesting because in the case of Rosenblatt, I think you gave that as an example of maybe the perceptron wasn't being hype. And Anna earlier gave some contemporary coverage around Hans Berger's EEG work and saying, like, yeah, in retrospect, that coverage might have been jumping the gun a little bit. And I think you both said the same thing, but the key is you have to take time into consideration. So like at the time that that article was written, if people had come down hard on AI in 1958, that would have been a mistake. And in retrospect, a lot of the advances that did make those things happen came out of Canada. Yoshua Bengio, Jan LeCun, Jeffrey Hinton, like deep learning that kind of that brought the revolution about, that was Canadian work. And so I'm really glad the Canadians didn't crack down on AI, in the 80s or 90s, because we wouldn't be where we are today. So I think in my mind, it's really important to take time into consideration when you're thinking about ethics or regulations.
Thank you for that comment. It's an important one. Rob, sorry, I forgot to tell people to introduce themselves. It's hard to moderate and be part of the panel. Okay, please introduce yourself and your affiliation again.
Rob Franklin from BlackRock Neurotech. So I'm just wanting to pose a question to the panel, and if any of the government officials from the Department of Commerce would weigh in, but just wondering if there's a perceived role that the U.S. should be playing in regulating export of technologies that may be used unethically or what we would consider unethically outside of the U.S. So you brought up data privacy and how the EU has put pretty strong provisions on their exports and imports of data. Is there anything here that we should be considering?
You're an export control person. I mean, I will say that there's, Mike mentioned the international neuroethics landscape, on a policy-making level, there are many, U.S. is involved with many others in conversations about gaps in neurotechnology regulation, not specifically necessarily export, but lots of areas. And I think there are efforts to work together. So one of the things I hope that would be clear clearer, maybe for this group, is that there is a concerted effort already in place and that export control would be one of many other considerations. I think maybe as a near-term concern, a lot of entities are really especially aware of data and are digging in very hard, deeply to figure out what uniqueness and what lack of coverage we have with data. And then the more difficult problems I think to address are around how certain kinds of brain interventions might challenge certain freedoms or offer inequitable advantage, not just in a military sense, but in an economic sense to augmenting, and I say that carefully. I'm not talking about superhero augmentation, but maybe a slight advantage in attention or focus that might not be available to someone else. So those types of considerations I think are happening, and they're probably more happening in the human rights conversation than they are necessarily in some of the circles we're talking about today. And some of that, honestly, I'm glad those conversations are happening, but it needs to be clear that some of that conversation around neuro rights has been driven by neuroscience hype and neuroethics hype. And so it's been a big job to do a lot of mitigation in that space to parse out the issues.
I mean, just to answer on the, just to reflect what was already said, and I think Matt Borman mentioned that data gives us some problems in export controls. When we're talking about data, we're really talking about what it takes to reverse engineer or an item, a machine that we control. But I can tell you that yes, in my experience, the U.S. government are looking at these issues. It's really what's the proper tool to address them. If with personal health information, is that is that HHS? Is that a different regulatory model than the export controls? I think it probably is, but we are looking at it generally. Yeah.
Okay. Actually, Ted, that's a great transition to what will be our next section on risk mitigation strategies. But first, a 10-minute quick break. Thank you, everybody.
And if you find you're a long ways from home, and somebody's doing you wrong, just call me, baby, and come back home. Call me, come back home. Call me back home. Call me. Things ain't always right. explain myself. I feel like I do. Though it hurt me so to let you know. When I look in your eyes, let me know how you feel. Let me know that love is really real, but it seems to me that I'm wrapped up in love. Don't you know that I'm still shut up in love with you? Yeah. All the years I see me loving you and you loving me. It seemed to me that I'm wrapped up in love. Don't you know that I'm still shut up in love with you? Hey, to know that I'm still shut up in love with you. Yeah, I tried, wanted to.
Snuggle Super Fresh. Comfort for every moment with 5-in-1 odor elimination.
Crunchy.
Tasty. Sweet or savory.
Always satisfying.
Give me Blue Diamonds. Crunchy, tasty, sweet or savory. Always satisfying. Give me Blue Diamonds.
Crunchy, tasty, sweet, or savory. Always satisfying. Give me Blue Diamond Almonds.
Can't believe that it's real. The way that you make me feel. I'm burning deep down inside. A love that I cannot hide. I know it's you and me, baby. And make the world go round. And if keeping you and loving you means laying all my troubles down. Here I am, baby. Come and take me. Here I am, baby. Come and take me. Take me by the hand. Oh, show me. Here I am, baby. It always ends up this way. Me begging you every day. All of that I cannot have. You broke my heart into half. I know it's you and me, baby. That make the world go round. Keeping you and loving you, laying all my troubles down. Yeah, come and take me.
About Export Control 101. We trying to get a better sense of what BIS needs and what they're trying to understand. Understanding that these are just foundational conversations we're having these first 2 days, but still we're trying to lay down some important points for us to further explore later. Then we talked a little bit about the broader landscape of concerns around neuroethics and neurotechnology, and some particular applications were brought up also by Mike. And now, if we had more time, we'd love to have a full workshop for today, but it's not going to happen. So we have a truncated conversation, but still we're going to talk a little bit about risk mitigation strategies in a variety of ways. And we're going to start with Joanna Arthur from DARPA, and then go to Lucy Turnas, and then with Amanda Postilnik on then we'll have a few minutes, about 15 minutes for conversation on that. Okay, so Joanna, coming to us virtually. So take it away, Joanna.
Testing, can you hear me?
We can, and I think you need to share screen if you can. Make it full presentation mode because it's in presenter view.
All right, how about now? Multiple screens open.
Go ahead and get started. Oh, yeah, we can just go this way. Go ahead.
Okay, I guess there's a lag. I'm sorry. So I was there yesterday in person. It was really great. Made some great connections and met some great BCI proponents. And I just want to first give a shout out to Dr. Lee, Betty and the organizers for inviting me, and Karen, Dr. Romanfinger for connecting us. And I'm getting a bit of feedback. Karen, can you just double check that you're hearing and see my slides?
I can see your initial slide.
Okay, there we go. All right. So, like I was saying, yeah, it was great being there in person. I'm sorry I can't be there today. It's great trying to meet everyone in person because obviously I think a lot of people in the room know DARPA, and without our partnerships, we wouldn't be able to do what we do, right? Because DARPA doesn't conduct research in a silo or research in itself, right? We really leverage the whole innovation engine. So I think while most of the audience is probably pretty familiar with DARPA, I'm still going to spend a couple of minutes just giving a quick overview of DARPA and its culture, and a quick snapshot of the programs that are within my portfolio that deal with brain-computer interfaces. And real quickly, sorry, I forgot to introduce myself. So I just joined DARPA back in August 2022. I come from a background in intelligence, in the intelligence community for over a decade. And my formal education and background is in cognitive neuroscience and applied behavioral science. And so DARPA, as many of you know, was founded in 1958 as a reaction to the launching of Sputnik. And so this technological surprise was, really unsettling to the US, and they didn't want it to be blindsided again by any, advanced technology of our adversaries. So the idea was to create this agency whose mandate was, pretty much, or is, to work on high risk and high reward problems. And the formula, really the secret sauce, working with DARPA on the outside as a transition partner, and now internally over the decades, is really based on the 3 pillars, which are the people, like program managers like myself, the processes, and the culture. And so the people,
pardon me, can you advance your slide?
Oh, that's strange. So you're not seeing that.
I didn't see the advanced slide, no.
Let me stop sharing.
Yeah, maybe stop sharing and present, and then share again.
Give me 1 second.
While Joanna's figuring out that, I will actually take this opportunity to mention that DARPA does have a neurotechnology, ethical, legal, social implications group. And I am one of those members along with others.
It seems to be an issue if I put it in slideshow. Can you see that?
No, I think, Joanna, just keep it like this, but you're gonna have to go to scroll to each one.
That's a problem from working in a different location. I'm sorry, I'm not in the office or there.
Okay.
So yeah, I was on this slide that really talks about the 3 pillars. Real quickly, I talked about the people. You know, we have a limited tenure, as you know, which really keeps the pipeline and new backgrounds and new blood, you know, coming through quickly. And regarding the process, DARPA is really metric heavy, right? So the metric driven programs and structures would clearly define success. And the 3rd pillar, again, is our culture, right? So DARPA is not afraid to fail, and pretty feeling confident that our idea is guaranteed to work is, you know, likely not where DARPA should be sitting at. You really want to be on a bit of the side of impossible, right? Pushing the boundaries of what we think is possible. All right, so yeah, just to really recap, DARPA's role within the DoD sort of ecosystem is really charged with creating these breakthrough, really paradigm shifting solutions. And what's really interesting working in DARPA is the cross-disciplinary fields and the various avenues of research and development that really contributes to not incremental advancement, but like these really disruptive technologies. And so both of my efforts, I want to say real quickly, really leverage a new internal initiative called the Embedded Entrepreneur Program. And so what's really nice about the EEI, or Embedded Entrepreneur Initiative, is that it's really trying to understand the private sector market dynamics. And I'm sorry I didn't catch the full panel this morning. I did come in at the tail end. I think I heard Mike or maybe Karen talking about really trying to understand industry. And what I like about the EEI is really it supplements someone like me who's been working in government and in just DoD that may not really understand or have that sort of corporate connections, right? It supplements that for DARPA researchers. All right, this next slide here, just real quickly again, most of the audience may know this, but DARPA is organized in 6 main technical offices here, and I sit in BTO, the Biological Technologies Office. Each of these offices have distinct sort of mission sets and technology domains, but where I reside in BTO is sort of the baby. It's relatively new. I believe it was created in 2014, and specifically to leverage and explore the potential of biotechnology and what it has to offer. All right, and so in BTO, we are currently focused on 3 main mission sets here. So detect and protect, warfighter readiness, and operational biotechnology. And so real quickly, what do these phrases actually mean? They're nice terms. So detect and protect is fairly obvious. Within that mission set, program managers and researchers are looking for, you know, new biological driven approaches for detection and diagnostics. Things like medical countermeasures to combat chemical, biological, and radiological threats to service members and warfighters. Things that, you know, are really going to help our boots on the ground. The warfighter readiness and sort of operational technology, biotechnology is where my programs sit. So warfighter readiness captures a fairly broad set of topics. So it's from warfighter health and recovery, right? So new devices for restoring function or assisting in injury healing, like burns, or like what we're talking about today, neurotechnology for advancing things like human and machine teaming. And then lastly, the operational biotech mission set that you see there down in the left corner, it really focuses on how we could solve really intractable problems like things like operating in extreme environments, right? And responding to changing environments. So really extreme battlefield environments. And lastly, also trying to build resiliency into our bioeconomy, supply chain. So that was a real quick, sorry to run through that really briefly, a real high level view of BTO as well as our office and mission sets. I'm now going to turn to some of the programs that I believe yesterday, I want to say was Amy, someone presented a little bit about DARPA's investments in the BCI area, and the program that I inherited, which is titled NESD, Neuroengineering System Design, is really focused on developing really revolutionary high-density neural prosthetics. And the devices here is really trying to get a real impressive goal, right? They're trying to increase the number of channels in which we interface with the brain by, 1,000 to over 10,000 over the current state of the art. And so right now we are down to 2 sort of instantiations of that. And both of those devices hopefully will be able to create novel therapies for restoring vision. And we do have, we are interacting with that EEI program. Our performers are set to get some help there. The second program, which is I also inherited, but it's really winding down. It's a nice glide path down. It's like over 5 years now. Is TNT, which some people may be familiar with, but the targeted neuroplasticity training program is really looking at not just establishing, but really extending the use of peripheral nerve stimulation to increase like synaptic plasticity, right? So some of the areas that they've been looking at in terms of military operations are like ISR tasks. For those in the audience, ISR is intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, marksmanship, and lastly, they just completed a field test in terms of language acquisition. And again, here are the 2 sort of practical applications, sorry, not practical, the 2 branches of the peripheral nerves that they were looking at was the trigeminal and vagus nerve stimulation. To really accelerate or increase that throughput of training. So I think that's a nice,
Okay. Great. Thank you so much, Joanna.
I'm sorry, did I go over time?
Thank you. Okay. And Joanna, we'll have opportunity for questions in a bit.
Okay.
And hopefully maybe we can also hear more about the Entrepreneur Activator initiative as well. And okay, so next, Lucy Turnus.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Lucy Turnus. I think I've had the opportunity to talk with almost everyone in the room today. I am with the Institute of Neuroethics, and I focus on neuro law and neuroregulation with a specific focus in international politics and political economics. So I study neurotech, not just as a US domestic issue, but also how it plays into the larger economic ecosystem. So I'm going to just briefly kind of go over how the export controls in its current status apply to BCIs, because I think there's been a lot of questions over what falls in and what doesn't, and then maybe give some opportunities for moving forward. Okay, so we kind of got set up, should we talk about foundational technology or emerging technology? And I think that it's an important point to say, does it really matter? There's always kind of foundational technology, but for this case, I wanted to, and this is going to be a very quick high-level talk, so I can't get into this in too much detail, but I'm going to break it up to hardware, software, and data and surveillance, which has been brought up, so we can kind of talk about how export controls really interface with your companies. Oh, no, it works now. So hardware, I won't go over things that have already been gone over today, but we know that there is a semiconductor export control that also came with subsequent legislative funding, which was important. And because obviously, as many of us know, there's a pretty specialized global supply chain, and cutting that supply chain off is quite difficult without putting a lot of money into growing our own domestic suppliers. So, looking at this, there is this export control was put in place for technologies that have existed and have high level use much longer than what BCIs currently are. So it is important to know what pieces of your potential work will fall into this, but it seems to very easily already fall in. I think we already mentioned that there's geospatial imagery as well. So I just wanted to highlight too that the US export controls, which I think was pointed out, are not only US origin products, but also foreign items that enter the United States. So it is really important as you are importing and not just exporting. Software, as was brought up, is really technical data, which is source code. And the sharing, shipping, transmission, or transfer of almost all encryption software in either source code or object code is subject to US export regulations. I heard a couple developers say, at our heart, we're a software company. And this is a lot of where tech would probably align itself now. So I'm not highlighting these cases to bring in hype that this is a constant problem, but this is why these issues come to light, that we know there have been instances of source code being removed from the US. The global supply chain makes it far more complex because we saw the Iranian drone go down and there was parts from more than a dozen US companies. The source code's going through multiple different companies. Not much that a BCI company in this current state would need to do or have to do, but just be very aware when you understand that these exist and that if you're using supply chains throughout the world. It did. Okay. So I think Anna brought up rightly that a lot of times we kind of skirt around, maybe risk and data, and that, this fits into a larger data ecosystem that's in conversations around many tech, not just neuro. Because in its current state, a lot of the risk is really focused on cyber attacks, because we see that in other technologies, and the possibility for foreign surveillance. And as was mentioned earlier, because I didn't really know what BIS was going to cover or not until this moment, neither individual or aggregate data really fits in easily to their definitions of commodity, software, or technology, so really lives outside of export controls, and once again, but is where we see a lot of the risk concerns that have come up over the last 2 days. I brought up everyone heard the history of the department, but there have been an executive order that President Trump that expanded some of the power, and then it was retooled by President Biden the following year, which is just to say that this department is obviously under a little bit more flex and public eye. This part is all outside of export controls. Is talking about that, but because this is part of a larger conversation on data, there was also a Protecting Americans' Data from Foreign Surveillance Act. It died last month because when a new Congress starts, non-passed bills die. But that would have established certain export controls on personal data of US nationals and individuals living in the United States. Among other requirements, the bill directs the Department of Commerce to identify categories of personal data that would be exploited by foreign governments and harm US national security if exported, re-exported, or in country transferred in a quality that exceeds the threshold established by Commerce. So I mentioned that even though it's a dead bill, that it was written, it could come back to life. People are talking about it. Many in the room will already know that TikTok is testifying before Congress next month about national security risks. We saw Facebook having to do the same. So this has been a rolling data issue of what is government's involvement and what should it be. So it is not shocking that it is now becoming a central conversation here, even though it is certainly not unique. It's important to note that in the TikTok case, we do see platforms like Apple start kind of getting involved in policymaking. The FCC commissioner actually wrote to Apple and asked about removing TikTok. Instead, they retooled their rules so to make what TikTok could extract from US users safer. So it shows that this is very much multi-stake. I work a lot in soft law. This is definitely an area where there is multiple people trying to figure out this problem. In 2023, there is the chance likely that California, Colorado, Virginia, Utah, and Connecticut could be enacting new privacy laws, changing them or coming to effect. I bring all this up. None of this part has a lot to do with export controls, but just to let people in the room know that this has been a building concern. You're seeing a lot of action in multiple different parts of governance. I wrote this, I added this last night because I heard a lot from companies asking about employment as a concern, and I think it was pretty well explained earlier. It was answered what the rules are and how you get licenses. And Amanda was kind enough last night to email me that in practice, we actually, prior to President Trump granting of deemed licenses was almost never denied. There does seem to be a switch to presumption of denial. So that's something that is flexible and maybe something for people in this room to watch. We don't know currently where that's going to keep going. It's also important to know that everything that's going on in technological development, meaning even before you've entered the market, that there's opportunities on how you protect your source code and products. This is just a quick article I wrote about how, China has created an advantage by really housing all of the non-human primates in one space to do neural research. And so being more aware of where we can take more advantage domestically is important. And for developers to know when they're utilizing things that wouldn't technically fall under an export control, but understanding that they could at some point. Okay, I'll wrap up. My look forward is actually extremely positive. I think that this is an area where there's a lot of opportunity to protect growth and with national security interests. I think developers can take a really strong lead here by understanding what the rules are and there exist, what gaps may exist, and just being aware that there is this increasing technological protectionism and uncoupling with China. Just while I was, flying over, we saw China release that they're going to put export controls on us over gene therapies and CRISPR. So some people brought up, is this the first time that that a medical device could have national security? A lot of these discussions were all had with CRISPR. We have a de facto ban, but China doesn't. China may not. So I think there are lots of examples, if anyone wants to further, because I'm out of time, where industry has taken a lead and created standards that have let them kind of flourish without being overly regulated. And that's something we really want to work on at the Think and Do tank. So I will end, so I don't go over.
Thank you, Lucy. So informative. I'm Amanda Postelnik. I'm a professor of law at the University of Maryland and a program director at the Center for Law, Brain, and Behavior at Massachusetts General Hospital. So this is a panel on risk assessment, and I'm going to talk about the risks of getting things wrong, which is something I'm really good at, but I admit it, so it's okay, right? I'm going to start with one of my own mistakes. In around 2010, I was very worried about something called the Veritas helmet, which some of you in this room may or may not have heard of. It was, depending on your aesthetic, a cool or sinister looking, I think, black motorcycle helmet type device with EEG built inside that its promoters claimed, as the name could suggest, Veritas read the truth from the mind of the person that it was placed on. And the company was promoting it through some press releases for intended military and law enforcement uses. They claimed it could be transformative for anti-terrorism investigations, among other things, and possibly for domestic law enforcement. And a device, as this one was represented to be, could foreseeably present a strategic advantage to its user base, or in the wrong hands, potentially some risk. But as it turned out, the major risk of the Veritas helmet was that academics and others wasted a lot of time on it, and hand-wringing, it didn't work, and military and domestic law enforcement purchasers, perhaps being savvier than me, didn't buy into it, which was a good thing. There were two other headline-grabbing companies at around the same time. This is the late 2000s, early 2010s. One called, these ones were based on fMRI technology. One was called Kifos, the other was called No Lie MRI. They both promised their systems could function as near-perfect lie detectors. And they aimed not at the international field of combat, but at domestic courts and also employers. I'm glad to say I wasn't the only professor who worried too much about these companies. There were numerous symposia and numerous law review articles. And, well, one is left wondering, did we waste our time? In one sense, no. It's important to predict different possible futures and the risks that possible futures could present. And then in imagining different possible futures, we can try to guide the state of the world toward better versions of those possible futures. Some waste of time is also inherent in the enterprise. If you're looking at different possible futures, by definition, most of them aren't going to come to pass. I can't say that it's not worth doing. And yet, if we had pushed for regulation at that time, all employees must be protected from having their mind read by their employer, or the companies working on these technologies must be subject to export controls because can you imagine what this helmet would do in the hands of one of our enemies? We would have been not just radically premature, but probably off point. So there is a real risk. There are advantages to being early, but there are also real risks to being early. And there's an analog to this example from the export control domain. In the early 1990s, the Department of Defense, in predicting one of these possible futures, identified neural network integrated circuits as a, quote, military critical technology, unquote, and export controls were implemented on these circuits under the Wassenaar Arrangement and under the Commerce Control List. The concerns around these neural network integrated circuits related to the development of future AI and the defense and strategic capabilities of artificial intelligence. 30 years later, artificial intelligence is increasingly ubiquitous and AI has tremendous security implications, but it's not based on neural network integrated circuits. So the predictions about the development of the field were correct, but the more granular prediction about what components and technologies it would be based on turned out to be too early. As Tim Curtin was talking about this morning, AI has developed largely with and through the use of GPUs, which are internationally widely available commercially and largely manufactured overseas, and are now subject to a really tailored regime of regulation that he described with great care. Now, just as AI developed differently, BCI has so far developed very differently than we might have predicted, even in the 2010s, which is quite recently. And that's not to say that there are no concerns that require being addressed now, necessarily. For example, Karen Rommelfanger and Ramses Albiades have both talked about brain-based and brain-acquired data being special, that it has unique biological and cultural features, and maybe unique significance to us in our relationship to our own data. As Dr. Rommelfanger touched on, there may be risks of discrimination, socially or in employment based on brain data. In the US, there might even be implications in acquiring or paying for health insurance. There are many reasons why brain data could be relevant and could potentially be meaningful distinctly from other forms of data. And yet, to the extent that such brain-based data ought to be subject to regulation, and this relates to what Lucy Tornes was just teaching us about, such regulation may be better suited to domestic law. One of the key reasons is statutory. The Department of Commerce regulates technology, and under Part 772 of the EAR, data does not fall under technology. Technology is described differently, so pure data regulation isn't really an option. As far as I know, I'm not a commerce expert. The commerce experts are the folks in the room. And also because there is a prolific, if somewhat maybe late to the table, domestic lawmaking activity around privacy rights and data privacy also that Dr. Tornes was describing. So in order to figure out when to regulate and how to regulate, yesterday we talked a lot about why and what. Why are we here and what are BCI? Today, I'm thinking a lot about the questions of when and how. When, at what point, is there specific foreseeable risk and concrete value in regulating specific components of carefully identified technologies? In other words, how do we avoid the mistake that I made in 2010 or that we might have seen in the 90s with neural circuits? And then also how? How do we keep collaborating with each other to identify these future risks and opportunities that could be relevant to regulation? For example, some of the technologies described by Mike Walmetz, which are fascinating, are different from or maybe beyond the imagining of what some of the stakeholders in the conversation so far have even known about. So we want to make sure that the right people working on the most interesting stuff are the ones who get to have input. And this just more generally points to the need for informed forecasting through collaboration. Karen Rommelfanger and Arlene Salas both outlined strong processes developed in part by themselves for and with other actors, multi-state actors and state actors and non-state actors that have developed collaboration tools and techniques already. And of course, the Commerce Department has run its own processes in developing collaboration, most recently in AI. So to borrow a phrase that was used earlier, how can we develop toolkits, working groups, and soft law in addition to regulation so that all the participants can engage in foresight with these collaborative communities? And I want to really thank everybody who made this event possible because it seems like this is the seed of the collaborative community that should grow to make sure that medical devices are unaffected, research proceeds as well as possible, and that any foreseeable concrete risk is approached in an informed and tailored way. Thanks a lot.
Okay, great talks. And I think you have begun to address some of the key questions that we really need to address to be able to help BIS productively and also help this group here understand where we fit into this conversation and how we might strategize for the best path forward. Now, Joanna, are you on virtually still? Okay, so are there any questions from the group at this point? Ah, there you are, Joanna. Hello. Yes, Al. Please introduce yourself, say your affiliation.
Yeah, hi, I'm Ali Mundy. I'm with Palantir. A couple, I don't know if my questions, if I have a question or if I have a comment. I'm trying to get a feeling, so my whole career has been in the government, so when I'm thinking about overmatch and making sure that our warfighters never go into a fair fight, that we always have the upper hand. I'm always thinking about how do we get them the best technology. At the same time, I just left DARPA, a year ago, and a lot of the programs that I was funding, a lot of the folks are here today. And so, in my opinion, and this is maybe more addressed to the Commerce Department part of this, is that, in my opinion, we're not here yet, right? From a military national security perspective, I don't think what we're developing today is of concern. The question is, as Amanda, you pointed out, when is that risk point? Mm-hmm. And when do we know when that happens? Mm-hmm. And what's the technology that we have to be concerned about? Mm-hmm. And I don't have an answer for that, but I have a recommendation as to maybe when we know we're there. Looking at various government organizations and how this all potentially works together, I would be watching and am watching what's happening on the ARPA-H side, right? Mm-hmm. Because when we look at what's happened at DARPA, all the way back, Amy talked about some of the programs, and even before then, in like Lee and I were talking about it yesterday, there was the Bioinfo Micro program that started even before that. So we've been DARPA has been, I can't speak for DARPA, DARPA has been into this for 25 years and spent millions of dollars. My portfolio alone was $250 million. Mm-hmm. And so All of that, though, really was about medical applications, restoration of function, depression, PTSD, all the types of things that we see in the military. So the military use of this technology wasn't from a national, well, you could tie it to national security, because if we aren't taking care of our soldiers, they're not going to want to sign up, right? So there is a connection there, but it's loose, right? But the thought is that if ARPA-H is, my thought, this is nobody else's, but from my perspective, if ARPA-H is standing up and DARPA has been developing technologies and medical technologies for the last 25 years, does that start to sway over to ARPA-H? And if so, what's DARPA going to do, right? That's where I would be looking. And so right when I was leaving, I was thinking that my own opinion is that when we start thinking about what's after this, you're going to start to see a lot of ethics discussions within the government. Karen and I started to engage right before I was leaving. So those would be indicators, in my mind, that there might be a change of thought, right? Maybe there is an augmentation discussion at some point in time. It's not now, it's not happening now, but what are the indicators that would lead us up to maybe thinking that that point is occurring? And I would be watching that, and I would be watching some of the next things that might be coming out of leading organizations on the military, on what they're thinking about and where are they putting their money, right? This is a 20-year indicator in brain-machine interfaces that we would have picked up on. So I think we have time to react here, right? Yeah. But let's watch what's happening over the next couple of years and see where that technology goes. And I think that might shed some light on maybe making some smart decisions as to when we need to really think about this.
Thank you, Al. And we'll be looking forward to when you've identified some indicators that we need to push forward as well. Looking forward to that collaboration. Joanna, do you want to weigh in on that, since it was about DARPA? And I know you also wanted to talk about the Entrepreneur Activator Program, if I'm
Sure,
remembering the name correctly.
Yeah, I don't know if I have the leisure to talk about ARPA-H interactions, but I would say that I would put it out there that those conversations have already begun about, what part, how do we interact, and what part of the, pie that we tackle. Yeah, I'm sorry I rushed through the brief, Karen. I did want to highlight your involvement as well as others' involvement in the inclusion of other neuroethicists in this sort of consortium, in this what we call LC groups. And so from my standpoint, LC groups are, beyond beneficial. It's not, I think I came in the tail end of that panel and someone talking about like checklists, and that really spoke to my heart, because I used to also be, for a decade, a human research protection official for an entire agency at the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. And when you start talking about frameworks and these 3 C's, people look at it as a checkbox, right? And something they just got to do to get their program started. And for me as a program manager, I can only speak to BTO. I can't speak to the other offices in DARPA, but our Neuro LC group are central to the program development. It's not just an afterthought once the program is stood up. As a new program manager, I already started engaging with you, Karen, and other folks. So again, I think it's important for the whole life cycle of the program. The second piece that I started to allude to in some of the programs that inherited as well as the new starts is this EEI new initiative. And so DARPA is teaming with several entities like Noble Reach Emerge to really provide that entrepreneurial expertise that myself or some other program managers may not have, in providing these connections with early stage investors and transition partners. And so I'm, again, not the spokesperson for that, Blake Beckstein, and there's a whole EEI office that helps in terms of providing the resources, but I did want to do a shout out to the EEI program. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanna, and that effort, that EEI effort, is really interesting because, as it says publicly on their website, so I feel like I can say it, it's key to kind of sharing it, focusing investments in the U.S., because there is a great interest from DARPA to commercialize, encourage individuals, researchers to commercialize on the technology that they've created. So maybe for a future conversation. Lucy or Amanda, anything else you want to add to that before we go to questions? Other questions? Please.
Okay, I was just going to quickly add that while I don't work in it, I've never worked for DARPA in that space. I think when we devolve the conversation to medical need, everyone tends to be in agreement that needs to happen quickly. I've created a BCI super weapon. Everyone understands that that's probably you're going to be watched by the government pretty closely. And so I just want to agree with your comment that along the way you listen to what development doing, what intelligence agencies are hearing, what other countries are doing. And I think that's the point of this conversation, is to kind of set up how we deal with that middle gray area.
Quick comment. I've got the microphone, but Al had the great content in his comment. I want to capture that. I want to put it in some guidelines or advice for a consultative process for how to intelligently keep track of risk and to be looking in the right places for that. So thank you, and I hope we can capture what you had to say. And
I think I heard Al say he wanted to volunteer to lead a working group or something. Okay, sorry. Next question.
Hi, as we're wrapping up the wonderful 2 days that we've had here, I kind of want to take just a minute to humbly bring it back to why we're all here today, and that is for the people, the human beings who are suffering in silence and need technologies like BCI, not tomorrow, not in 5 years, not in 10 years. We need it because every single day is torture for hundreds of thousands of people who are now using letterboards and just cannot have the basic human needs of communication and potentially mobility. So my ask is this, and it's a humble ask. First of all, thank you to every single person who's here today and all the contributions that you've made to bring this field forward. My ask is, what's next? And how are we going to set a timeline for what is coming next? Because we, as patients, cannot wait 6 months, a year, 5 years to actually reconvene, regather, really come up with what those risks are that the Department of Commerce have identified based on all the knowledge that has been shared by the experts. All the experts, most of the experts are here, whether it's in ethics or BCI or technology or academics or public, everybody's here. We have the information. So we as patient groups want to know, what is the timeline? When is this happening? When are we reconvening? When are we going to find out what those concerns are so that we can work backwards, know that we're here to help the human being, and how do we work backwards to make it happen? Thank you.
Wonderful comment as we near the end of this. Do we want to have some comments from our panelists? And then I see you coming around the corner. Are you wanting to respond as well? You might. Why don't you have a seat, friend? Okay. Lucy and Amanda, and then maybe we'll move down the line here with comments if you have them.
I want to thank Dr. Lalji and Zoe Lalji for their participation, which has been so valuable. And I learned a lot from Tim Curtin today about the exemption for medical devices. So on that point, I would like to turn to you.
Thank you very much. So in terms of next steps, so we'll take all the information that we have from this conference and think about it a little bit. I can't commit to do anything as a result. I think we sort of outlined a little bit what the scope of our controls are. It's really on items, not technologies broadly understood. We don't typically control medical devices. In terms of what we can do to support the development of needed advances in this field, I know there's funding from various government agencies. I think also there's some interest in improving biotechnology broadly. I don't know whether this fits into the scope of that. Some key takeaways that I did not know coming into this. I was not fully aware of the supply chain issues that are facing people working in this field. That's something that I'll certainly take back. So I'm not sure where we go. One of my hopes from this is that we get, there's been a lot of discussion of communities of interests. My colleague Tungeli mentioned that he's standing up an emerging technology TAC. That is the absolute best way for us to interact with industry. The technical advisory committees have a direct line into whether or not we should be controlling and to what degree. So I would like to encourage you all to keep track of that and feed into that process. That's probably where, don't like to predict, especially about the future. But I think that where we'll go with this is we'll take the information and we'll move it into the broader conversation about emerging technologies, which Dr. Tongeli will lead.
Great question to transition into our closing. So just to wrap up, our intent for these past 2 days was really to set the foundation for a fruitful pathway forward. Our intent was not to address and be able to solve many of the detailed questions that would need to be answered before we could put forward a fruitful path forward. But we set that foundation together. And the first day and today, we're grateful for our lived experience advocates for sharing the gravity of the circumstance and potential risks related to unnecessary regulation or constraints on development and innovation. We also heard from the state of the art, from non-invasive to invasive or implantable, learning kind of the complexities already of trying to circumscribe and define these technologies. And then we ended up moving on to a path today. We were talking about what does it mean nuts and bolts to operationalize and deal with the competing obligations of trying to protect patients and innovation while also protecting national security, and what are the constraints of certain tools and mitigation strategies that we have. So clearly we have a wonderful community here. I think I know many of the virtual attendees are probably also wonderful community members, and we have an opportunity before us to continue collaborating, and I hope that we strike while the iron is hot and continue with this energy as Dr. Lalji pushed us forward on. And with that, it's been really my honor and privilege to be able to facilitate today, and thank you for your grace and for your curiosity and humility throughout these past 2 days, and I hope we can continue to cultivate those relationships in that community as we move forward. And with that, I'll pass it on to Betty.
Thank you, Karen. I appreciate that. So we have come towards the end of the in-person meeting. And so before I forget, after lunch, there's actually a virtual sessions with other speakers that want to talk about this topic. So for those who do not have to go directly to their flights or whatever, you're more than welcome to stay in the room and listen to the virtual comments. So I'd like to take this chance to thank Karen for an outstanding job as a moderator. And my deepest appreciation and thanks go to Mac Angle and his team at Paradromics for inviting everyone here from the BCI community to share their knowledge, their experience, and innovations. I want to thank members of his team, especially Violet, Babette, and Ken, who did an outstanding job in making the conference run smoothly. It was a great example of a public and private collaboration, and they went above and beyond in planning a conference such as this for discussion. I also want to thank the BIS IT team who worked out all the technical kinks for this hybrid conference.